order the Parks and Recreation Commission meeting for today, March 25th. Ms. McGill, we'll do the pledge first. Ms. Connor, will you lead us?
Yes. Ready? Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, Ms. McGill.
Chair Longstreet.
Here.
Vice Chair Larimore Hall.
Here.
Connor.
Here.
Hockman.
Here.
Burns.
Here.
And intern Torres Santos is not here.
Okay. Ms. Rapp, do we have any changes to the agenda?
Yes, we do, Chair Longstreet. We recommend that you take item 8 after the street tree items.
Okay. Do we have any written communications? None that I've seen. That brings us to public comment. Any member of the public may address the Commission for up to 1 minute on any subject within the jurisdiction of the Commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the Commission today. And seeing no one for public comment, we will move on to Community Service Recognition Awards. Ms. Rapp, the first one is a little.
Chair Longstreet, we have a presentation from Cameron Benson, the manager of the Creeks program.
Okay. I know.
Step up here. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Cameron Benson. I'm the Creeks Division Manager for the city, and I'm here today to acknowledge and recognize and thank you for your service to the Creeks Advisory Committee as the liaison for the Park and Recreation Commission. And I wanted to say to your fellow commissioners that in my experience working with you, you've done an excellent job representing all of them, and it's been an absolute wonderful experience to work with you. I have to tell you, BB has probably the track record for the best attendance on the committee, and one of your fellow commissioners is raising an eyebrow, but she's got an excellent attendance record. But more importantly, BB always is there to provide thoughtful and positive and constructive comments to the committee. I have a presentation or a plaque to present to her today that has a photograph of one of the larger projects the Creeks Division has done. It's a before and after photograph of the estuary restoration at Arroyo Burro, and BB has been on the committee as this project was moving forward, and gets some credit for the excellent results we have over in the Arroyo Burro estuary. So, on behalf of the Parks and Recreation Department, the Creeks Division, and the Creeks Advisory Committee, I want to thank you for your service on the committee.
And I would just say that I always get a lot more out of it than I ever give, and I learned so much being the liaison to Creeks, scientific things that I never took in college, and it was always fascinating, and they do wonderful work, and I appreciate it. Thank you. I'll kind of miss those Wednesday nights. And that brings us to our second recognition. So let me, Ms. Rapp, did you want to?
Chair Longstreet, we actually have a presentation prior to giving out these certificates. We're very, very pleased to see so many members of the program that we're honoring here today to receive their recognition. And I don't want to step over everything that Antonio Velasquez, our community services supervisor, will say, but I have to just say, oh, and Pete, are you doing the report? You're both doing the report? Okay. But, you know, a lot of the great work that this department does in the community is done by people of the community. And this is a perfect example how it's a great program that has existed only through the support of people that will be recognized for those efforts today. So with that,
Chairperson Longstreet, Commissioners, good afternoon. I'm glad to be here. In the midst of all of these negative crises, issues that come before you and come before us as a community, I'm glad to be here to say that there's always something good to say about our community, regardless of how bad things are. One of our programs is something that I think is so important to our neighborhood, especially in providing through our community centers a service that is so basic, which is nutrition. We have two programs that we operate out of our community centers, and that is the Mobile Food Pantry and the Mobile Farmers Market, a collaborative, a very effective collaborative that we have had for years now with the Food Bank of Santa Barbara. Every week, we serve over 400 households and over 1,600 individual family members. This program is divided between the two community centers, three community centers. I'm sorry. The Mobile Food Pantry is a program that provides dry goods, canned goods, and vegetables when they're available every first Tuesday and every third Tuesday of the month at Lower West Side Center, 629 Cornell Place in the Lower West Side neighborhood, and at Franklin Neighborhood Center on Montecito Street on the east side of town. Our Mobile Farmers Market is operated every Monday at the Louise Lowry Davis Center, every Monday at the West Side Community Center, and every Thursday at the Franklin Neighborhood Center from 11:30 till about 12:30. I just want to inform you that at both Louise Lowry Davis Center and West Side Community Center, due to scheduling problems, we're going to be switching our hour from 11:30 to 1 p.m. in the afternoon. These are just some photos. I want to be very brief because I know you have a long schedule, but these are some photos that basically give you an idea of what our distribution looks like. Okay. And I just want to emphasize to you that this particular program, if it was not for the assistance and effective collaborative of our nonprofit community, of the Food Bank of Santa Barbara, but more importantly because of the citizen participation in our program by volunteers that are also working members of this neighborhood, but that make the time to come and assist us and make this program possible, because it is 100% volunteer driven. And that's why we are here today to recognize the fine work that all of these individuals have done with our program. And at this time, what I'd like to do is read out their names so that you may be familiar with the individuals that are behind this program.
And we'll have them come up and receive their certificates. I'll come down. I would just like to say that I have been to the programs, and it is well run, and thank you to your staff as well as to all of our volunteers, because it really does make a difference. It's great.
I'd like to echo that. I've been to the programs, and it is very well run. Thank you so much.
Quisiera también darles las gracias para ustedes, que quizá algunos de ustedes no me hayan entendido, que les agradecemos mucho por la participación en nuestro programa, porque si no fuera por ustedes, no tuviéramos este programa. Queremos, por eso les llamamos, para que vinieran este día, para reconocer el trabajo que han hecho a nuestra comunidad. ¿Okay?
Gracias a los coordinadores que son los que nos están... Sí, my name is Nancy, and I'm saying thank you for these guys, because everything is possible because these guys work so hard with everyone, and thank you to everyone. Thank you.
Cuando les llame su nombre, por favor, pasen adelante, por favor. Harvey Jessup. Harvey Jessup works as a volunteer at the Louise Lowry Davis Center. Jessup, I'm sorry.
We'll correct your certificate. We'll correct it, but thank you.
Okay, you're very welcome.
We'll correct that and get it to you.
Is it Anderson?
Robert Dewars, volunteer participant at our Davis Center program. Rafael Ramirez, a volunteer at Davis Center, is not present. Juana Nava, volunteer at the Westside Community Center program. Raquel Mendoza, Westside Community Center volunteer.
Thank you, Raquel, for everything.
Gregorio Lopez is not here. Jose Gonzalez,
Thank you so much.
Narciso Gonzalez was not here today. For Franklin Neighborhood Center, Monica Kong, not here. Nancy Lorenzano. Nayeli Arias. Yuleni Arias. Not here. Norma Mares. Ofelia Ortega. Jaime Huerta. María Hernández. Armando Ortiz. Violeta Mares. Catalina Rangel. Guadalupe Rangel. Silvia Anaya. Félix Bustos. Álvaro Sumán. No. Juan Frausto. Alejandro Catalán. Okay. Lore Hernández. Ruth Muñoz. And now for the Lower West Side Center, Rosa Sanchez. Saúl Sánchez. Adanancy León. Víctor Manso. María, oh, no, sorry, he's here. Victor.
It's Alonso.
Alonso. María Dorado. Isabel Botello. Frank Luján. Enedina Gil. Susan Mabrueno. These are the volunteers that make our food distribution program at the West Side, Lower West Side, and Franklin Neighborhood Centers a complete and total success that are providing such a great benefit to our community that I want to congratulate. And thank you.
Thank
And I would
you.
like to just add one additional comment, and I know that Antonio thanked the food bank of Santa Barbara County. I think it's really important in these times when There are so many people in our community struggling to make ends meet that, not only the service that we're recognizing today of the people who are helping to distribute it, but the agencies, the nonprofit agencies that help make the food available, that we provide that support to them too. And I just want to acknowledge the terrific work that they do in the community, and we're so pleased to partner with them. Thank you very much.
Okay. That brings us to Commissioner Committee Assignment Reports. Does anyone have anything to report? Mr. Hockman.
Thank you, Chair Longstreet. I did attend the Creeks Restoration Advisory Committee. It was largely a meeting with reports. We talked about the so-called Gulf project, the Las Positas stormwater management project, also our Creek Tree program, which allows the Creek program to partner with residents who are creekside for planting trees, and our business assistance program.
Thank you. Mr. Burns.
Thank you. I attended the Arts and Crafts Show committee and also went to the art show on Sunday, and it's a very active group. I enjoyed going there. I also have been to a couple of teen council meetings, a meeting here, and then also at a group, what they call a task force, a subcommittee group that I went to. So they were both both of them very different and very good to go to.
Good. Anyone else? I attended the Golf Advisory Committee, which was my first golf meeting, and it was fascinating. I am not a golfer. I know nothing about golf, and I learned a lot, and they are experts on our golf course and have some good ideas coming up in the future. And our new appointee last month had very interesting information. I attended the cake cutting ceremony, the 2-year anniversary of 1235, the Teen Center. It was a nice event. Great to see that so full of people at that point. And I had the privilege of attending the CPRS District 8 Awards with Nancy Rapp and Santos Escobar and Dan Bufano. And that was last Friday night. And the city received awards for park planning. We received an award for Bonet Park expansion. We received, let's see, I'm going down my list here. We did very well. We received, Dan Bufano was a champion of the community, and I think we need to take a minute and really honor him. He has done over 30 years of volunteer work to keep the Rose Garden alive. He's the driving force behind the Rose Garden, and deserved more accolades than we can give him here. So that was great to see him receive that honor, and I found out how much he's done. So, congratulations, and it was a well-deserved award. We run an agency showcase award for the marketing theme campaign, Resolution Solution TV campaign. And then our own Nancy Rapp has served for 2 years as the president, and so she received many accolades as getting the District 8 up and running again, and with her board, and it was nice to watch the installation of the new officers. There was a sigh of relief coming from Ms. Rapp at that point. But it was a very nice event. It was interesting to see the facility we went to in Atascadero. It was great. So did you have anything to add to that, Ms.? No, it was a wonderful event, though. I was really pleased to attend that. So that brings us to commission and staff communications. Do we have anything, Ms. Rapp, to report in there? Okay. And I think we will kind of skip over our youth council report. Our youth council member could not attend tonight. And that brings us to the consent calendar. Summary of council actions. Is there any information anyone would like, or any? It was pretty brief, as I recall. And we are now to the approval of the minutes for February 25th and for a special work session on March 9th. Any corrections or any input?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
As submitted, second.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, we've passed the minutes. And now we are to our Street Tree Committee recommendations for action. Mr. Downey. Item 5A1 is the 300 block of East Arriaga Street.
Chair Longstreet, Commissioners, the 300 block of East Arriaga Street is lined mostly with brush cherry trees. There are 2 other trees besides these 8. In February of this year, one of the brush cherry trees fell. All the trees at the site had been inspected prior to that tree falling, and it was noted that the tree that fell had a pronounced lean. Forestry was working with Public Works to arrange to have the sidewalk removed on that section and the tree removed all with one project. Unfortunately, the tree fell before we could get that project going. The other trees were inspected for safety at that time, and there was no indications that there was any hazards on those trees. Some of the other trees do lean, but not nearly to the degree of the one that fell. This lean on these existing trees is a result of the trees reaching out away from the building for light. They've always been oriented in that direction, and it's not something that they've shifted or anything. So we've determined that they appear to be safe at this time and don't warrant removal. Based on that, the Street Advisory Committee and staff recommend that this be denied.
Thank you. Questions, comments? I would say I made a site visit, and I think it would be a tremendous loss to have all those trees taken down. I think they do a tremendous job of softening that building.
I made a similar site visit, and on the other side of the street, we've got the same trees, and it looks very nice with all of the trees there. And I concur that I don't think we really want to get rid of the trees.
No. I'd entertain a motion.
I move to concur with the recommendations of the Street Tree Advisory Committee on item A1.
And I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. That brings us to 5B1, 32 East Padre Street.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, the application is for 2 blue gum eucalyptus trees. Pictures don't do them justice, but it was difficult to get pictures of these trees. The trees are on a slope that leans towards the home. The request was because they felt that there was a danger to the home from these trees falling. The tree closest to the driveway of the 2 has no buttressing at the base, which would indicate that there are roots near the surface. This can be a sign that there may be a problem with that tree. The other tree appears to be stable. Street Advisory Committee and staff recommend that this tree be trimmed and preserved. The trimming can balance the tree out more, and we feel the tree will be safe. Street Advisory Committee and staff recommend the approval of the tree closest to the driveway and denial of the tree farthest from the driveway.
Mr. Downey, that is not what our recommendation says, though. So we need to make sure we do. So the recommendation is for removal of the one nearest the street. Is that what you said? Or
Chair Longstreet, the nearest the driveway. of the two.
Okay.
And I apologize if the report wasn't clear. I'll work on
Yeah.
it.
It looks like it's removal of both of them is kind of what it looks like. Okay, the questions of staff. I see it's down in the written body of it. It's a little better description, but I kind of looked at the approval part. I would,
Comment, behind those eucalyptus trees that you cannot see are some palm trees that are very nice, and I think this will help. You know, there's a lot of tree growth in that area, and it's a very beautiful area, and I think the recommendation I'm agreeing with, and let me concur with staff that we and Street Tree Advisory Committee make a motion for, I guess, 5B2? 5B1, that we remove the tree closest to the driveway and leave the tree furthest from the driveway just to have it trimmed.
Second.
discussion?
Fourth.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that brings us to 5C1, 2726 Miradera Drive.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, the property is a homeowners association, and there weren't specific addresses that we could guide you to look at this tree. However, it's a rather large cypress tree. We suspect that it is a Guadalupe cypress, but we can't confirm that with all accuracy, but it is definitely cypress species. The request was that an elderly person lives at that property there, and the debris causes trip hazards for that person. The tree impacts the growth of the adjacent street tree, presents a fire hazard over the building, and is inconsistent with the remaining landscaping on the association, and its removal would improve views. The Street Tree Advisory Committee staff determined the tree is healthy, considered a skyline tree as it's the largest tree within the immediate area. The tree can be trimmed to achieve clearance over the roof. The fire department recommends 10 feet of clearance over buildings, and that's certainly achievable in this case. The tree is not significantly impacting the city tree. Because of those reasons, the Street Tree Advisory Committee and staff recommend that the owner prune the tree to provide fire clearance, and recommend you deny the removal request.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Any motion?
Move to concur with the recommendation of the Street Tree Advisory Committee on item 5C1.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Discussion. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Passes unanimously. And that brings us to 2130 Mission Ridge. And we do have speakers for this item. Mr. Downey, would you like to start with the staff presentation?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, this group and previous commissioner members have looked at this item twice before. Each time there's been a request to have more information provided. At the latest review, the Commission reviewed it in November of 2008. At that time, the Commission requested information about whether the wall repair was approved. That approval is in your packet. The tree is owned by Marymount School. It is located at 2130. The wall extends from 2132 into 2130. as these two properties used to be one property and it was subdivided. The applicant is from 2132. The applicant received permission for the repair of the wall as indicated in your packet. The wall has not been designated historic. However, the repair of the wall in place will allow a better opportunity to achieve that designation. If the commission approves this removal, staff recommends no replacement tree at this location. There's a large Canary Island palm adjacent to this tree which would remain in this space. In addition, the school will also expend a significant amount of money to achieve this work and if it's approved. The Street Advisory Committee staff do not want to lose this magnificent tree. This is a tough decision for us as well. Although it may jeopardize the historic designation of the wall, Street Review Advisory Committee and staff recommend alternate methods or locations be explored to replace the wall or repair the wall. Street Tree Advisory Committee and staff recommend you deny the removal. Part of this process has involved the Historic Landmark Commission staff. Jake Jacobus is here from that staff to answer any questions you may have about that process and their approval of the wall. In addition, members of the school are here as well if you have questions about their process.
Okay. Mr. Jacobus, did you want to come up and enlighten us in any way?
Good evening,
Welcome.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission. The issue that we have, I always hate to lose a tree. I mean, quite frankly, there just aren't enough of them on the planet, and it is a magnificent tree. However, this one happens to be impacting quite significantly a potential historic landmark of the city. These are the walls of the original Black Estate when the Marymount School and the three adjacent residential properties were one at one point. And the walls were all built as part of that original Black Estate in 1913. They've been there since 1913, but unfortunately the root system of the tree is doing significant damage to the wall. The problem with relocating the wall, saying, okay, well, if we leave the tree in place and we pull the wall further out towards the street, is that once you relocate the resource, it loses a lot of its historic significance, and we would lose the ability to have it designated on the National Register. We only have 6 National Register designations in the city. It's not that easy to get. So these walls, that gives you an idea just how significant these walls really are as a grouping. And we're talking about the entrance gates, the wall that you see where the tree is damaging the wall, and there's a lot of walls on the property which would also be part of the designation. So the applicant did, with my help, create a restoration plan which I've reviewed and approved. And basically what this does is assure that they're going to disassemble the wall and reassemble the wall exactly the way it is now. And it does allow for the fact that there will be potentially some breakage. We've had that in the past where not every boulder can be saved, but they have stockpiles of original material on the site that can replace any breakage. And they also did, as was mentioned in the staff's report, that they did get a permit to do the work. So I'm here to answer any specific questions you might have, but it would be my recommendation to please, save this wall. And unfortunately, like I say, I hate to lose a tree, but I think in this case the wall is a little bit more significant.
Mr. Hoffman, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. I have a question. You had mentioned that there are many walls on the property and that this is part of a system that might be up for an historic landmark designation. Would losing this piece of the wall negate the possibility of the rest of the wall being historic?
There are a lot of walls, and so, and I'd like to say no just so I could bolster my argument, but I think that no, we could still landmark what's left. But this is an important segment because it does face the street. It's the first thing you see as you enter. It's right next to the gate, and so it is an important segment of the wall.
All right, thanks.
Okay. We may have questions later, but we will take the public comment now on the wall.
So first we have Lauren Carl Troiani.
Cool.
Good afternoon. I'm Lauren, and I am on the Marymount Board of Trustees. I am also the chair for the Buildings and Grounds Committee. Now, we did meet on this issue. We knew that the different agencies, the HLC and you, were reviewing this, and that the HLC was recommending that the wall be preserved. And per our last meeting, it seemed like that was going to be the directive if indeed the wall was going to be repaired. And so when we met as a board, we did find that that was fine as a position for the school, because we do want to maintain our good relationship with our neighbors, the Gabrielsons. We did meet with the Gabrielsons also several times, and we've worked out that they went ahead and submitted drawings for approval per your request, that all that was done. They got the, including the portion that's on Marymount property. We also have an agreement for coordination of the work properties that the Gabrielsons have agreed to manage, and that we have an amount that we've agreed for reimbursement. So we basically sort of done all of our homework in preparation if this should go ahead and go through. And we are fine with it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eric Gabrielson.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to introduce myself. I am the applicant, and I'm really here more for questions than comment, because we have spent a fair amount of time on this in the previous meeting. And it did seem to me that the direction we were going was that we had received a preliminary approval that was subject to getting the plans worked out in detail. And I'd like to add that it just simply not possible to maintain a tree in this location. The compromise type of idea simply doesn't work. The wall is really it's been turned into a ruin at this point, and just since the time I was in front of you last time, there's been further damage to it. So it's nice to think about historic designation and the rest, but it is an important part of the character of this part of Santa Barbara, and none of us are excited about this. I can tell you that it's at considerable expense, $18,000 to do the repair to this wall. Not something we want to do again by taking the risk of possibly moving the wall slightly and dealing with an additional cost several years down the line. So we appreciate your studying this and making a hard decision, but I really think that we can't let eucalyptus trees turn historic walls into rubble. So thank you.
Thank you. In the back, I see Kellum DeForest, and I believe he would only be at our meeting really for this issue, maybe? Jake, would you check? Mr. DeForest just came in. Oh, is he maybe here for the tree preservation?
Chair Longstreet, I believe he is, yes.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to make sure, because I know Mr. DeForest is quite... Okay. Okay, then we'll take this back to the commission. I understand Mr. DeForest is here for this tree preservation issue. Are there questions?
Chair Longstreet?
Yes.
Just because we have two new commissioners that were not present for either of the two previous hearings on this item, I think it's important to just add the explanation that when the item came forward before, the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommended denying the removal, and the staff concurred. However, at the discussion at the commission, there was a revisiting of that and more discussion of the value of the historic wall. Thus, we asked the applicant to go do more work and come back with that information. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of that background so that you understood what the history was, and perhaps some of the commissioners would like to share.
Where do you see it in its lifespan? Chair Longstreet, the tree was, in my opinion, planted relatively close to the time that the wall was built. And this tree can live typically 200 years in this area. So I would say somewhere around 50% of its lifespan.
Okay. That's always interesting to me because I'm kind of always looking at whether they're going on the up or the down part of their. Well, because safety becomes an issue. With the age of the tree, we enter more safety concerns become an issue. So, I think that the applicant, in my opinion, did what we asked them to do, and we, at that point, were leaning toward the importance of the preservation of the wall. So that is my recollection. Ms. Connor, were you at that November?
Yes, I just had a question. If I remember correctly, was there some talk of pruning? Oh, sorry. Was there some talk of pruning the roots?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Connor, there are differing opinions about the effects of root pruning on the tree, and without the site being open and actually inspecting the site at the time of repairs, I can't say for certain whether or not it will compromise the tree.
Okay.
I would just say, looking at the size of it, I could never vote for root pruning on a tree that size in that location. It would seem to me to be way too big of a risk to take.
I agree.
So, other thoughts, Ms. Larimore Hall?
Well, two things. One, I remember this item quite well, and I remember that, and the applicant and the representative from Marymount, pointed this out, that it did seem to be consensus on the commission at that time, understanding that it's 2/5 different now, but that we were ready to make a decision about, basically choosing the wall over the tree. And so I'm definitely reticent to go back on that. I do, I don't understand, and perhaps it's my relative youth or the fact that I live downtown. I don't know what it is, but I don't quite understand the metaphysics of why something can't be a historic landmark if it's moved a few feet over. I also understand the sentimental value of those kinds of designations. But I think that, as Chair Longstreet said, we asked the owners and the interested parties to go and do some work. They did it. It's their contention that it's either the, again, whatever kind of symbolic value, having the possibility of another item of architecture in the city be designated as a historic landmark versus a rather tall eucalyptus tree. And so between those two things, I'm ready to vote I'm ready to vote against the recommendation of the Street Tree Advisory Committee and approve the removal.
A motion?
And I would move as such.
Second.
Okay, discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, thank you. I think we're all sorry to see that tree go, but I don't know, eucalyptus in a high fire area anyhow. Thank you all for doing the work we asked you to do. That brings us to item 8. We are going to do the tree preservation policies and enforcement procedures. And this is for action. We have seen this before, but we do have 2 new commissioners for this item.
Chair Longstreet, Jill Zachary, Assistant Director, will do the introduction for this item.
Chair Longstreet and Park and Recreation Commissioners, Tim Downey and I are going to tag team on this presentation. I have some initial introductory remarks, and Assistant City Attorney Scott Vincent will also be joining us. A couple of things. This item has been before the Commission on 2 separate occasions in both September and November of last year. It's a project that staff has been working on for over a year. It's interdepartmental committee with the City Administrator's Office, Community Development Department, City Attorney's Office, Parks and Recreation Department, Fire Department. We've been through a number of public meetings. And really, we're back here today. At the November meeting, the Commission did forward the staff recommendations to the City Council. We're back here today because the City Council asked us to come back to you and also the Street Tree Advisory Committee to look more carefully at American national standards related to tree pruning and best management practices. So that's what we'd like to cover today, and the role that they would play in the municipal code and tree preservation policies. We have a little bit of background, both for the public and for our new commissioners, which we'll go through fairly quickly, so we want to make sure that everyone is up to speed, and there may be additional questions if we skip something. Also like to point out that the focus of today's presentation is solely on the tree preservation portion of this work effort. The Commission will recall that we talked about landscape preservation policy issues. Since the purview of the Commission is focused on trees, that's what we're limiting ourselves to today. We are scheduled to go to the City Council Ordinance Committee on April 14th, so we're also looking for your recommendation today. Your packet has a number of attachments which provide a lot of background and overview. Unfortunately, we determined today that your attachment 4 was incomplete. That attachment is actually the language, the proposed changes in the municipal code. We have handed that out to you. The changes are in red, and we're hoping that the Assistant City Attorney will go through some major changes with you today. If the Commission feels like it can go ahead and make recommendations, although you would be reviewing it, and specifically focusing on the changes that were recommended at the Street Tree Advisory Committee, which I believe are on pages 10, 11, and 14. So with that lengthy introduction, I'll get right into the PowerPoint. It wasn't really part of the presentation. Briefly, just review with you our tree preservation regulations, the recommendations that you saw in November, discuss the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendations, and as I indicated, ask the Commission to forward those recommendations to the City Council Ordinance Committee. There also has been quite a bit of public input, and so that's partly why we've been going over this on a regular basis to make sure that what we get to is the right solution. As we all know, public trees are regulated within the city. Street trees, trees within our parks, our city facilities, and other city property. Private trees are also regulated, some private trees, those that are located in front yard setbacks. Generally, they have to be more than 4 inches in diameter. Setbacks vary from 10 feet to 35 feet, as the Commission is aware. There aren't setbacks in manufacturing in most commercial zones. Parking lot trees are also private trees that are regulated under the zoning ordinance, generally in commercial, industrial, and multifamily condominium apartment properties. And then, of course, we have our historic and specimen trees that are designated that way by the City Council. Tree violations, and we came to this topic and this work effort as a result of some fairly significant high-profile violations, and the City Council directed us to look at these policies and come up with some recommendations. What we currently do is we work with our Community Development Department and determine whether it's determined from an outside source or a city source if there's a violation, whether it exists. We provide an administrative citation, and there's a $100 fine per tree. If warranted, fines are imposed on both the property owner and the person that did the work. And so that violation could be for removing a tree without a permit in a setback, pruning a tree excessively within a setback, pruning a street tree without a permit, and so on, as the Commission is aware.
Committee, but we've been in public forum since
September of last year. We've been to the Street Tree Advisory Committee on 4 occasions. This is the 3rd occasion at the Park and Recreation Commission. And then since both trees and landscaping can be the purview of design review boards, they've also been involved in this process. The City Council considered those recommendations on December 9th and concurred with staff recommendations to move them to the Ordinance Committee, but also, as I indicated, to do additional work. The recommendations that we have relate to enforcement and penalties, establish some consistent measures throughout the code related to how we measure a tree. We determined in our review that we had some inconsistencies, so now is a good opportunity to make everything more consistent. And then also to add an exemption for tree removals or trimming when it's required by the fire department to maintain defensible space or comply with the city's wildland fire plan. So some city policy had changed, and we need to update the municipal code to make it more consistent. The other thing, our other recommendation is that we extend protection of trees to parking lot trees to those shown on approved landscape plans, and that's been an area that's been unclear. So not just setback trees and parking lot trees, but trees that are approved on a landscape plan could be associated with new residential, new commercial development. And then also some definitions related to when a tree straddles the setback. If 50% of it's in the setback, it's considered within the setback. We spent a great deal of time looking at penalties for violations and spent some time in public forums talking about those penalties. We came up with 2 different scenarios, and today we'll just review the scenario that was recommended by the Commission to go to Council, where we would establish a fine structure and involve both the property owner and the person or company that provided the work. The proposed fine structure is related to the type of offense and the size of the tree. And as the Commission will note, there's a language up to $500, for example, for trees with a diameter of 4 to 12 inches, up to 1,000, more than 12 inches, and up to 24. And similarly for removal, there's a graduated scale related to the type of violation that might occur, and also to provide some flexibility, because in some cases a violation could be very egregious, in other cases it may not be that significant. This is an example of an egregious violation to give the Commission an idea of what would be significant from the staff perspective. This is a magnolia street tree that was pruned without a permit, and its character was significantly altered. Here's an example of a setback tree that was topped. Other recommendations, and we mentioned this to the Commission in November as well, is the city's role in improving education and understanding of our municipal code for both landscape companies and tree companies. And we're committed to providing at least some sort of annual education program. And then also improving our website so it's easy to find those rules. It's easy to understand and find where to obtain a pruning or removal permit, and better understand how to move forward with the process. The reason why we're here today is there was quite a bit of public discussion at Council, and we received public letters, and the Commission has received that information as part of its November packet, requesting that the city look more carefully at the use of American National Standards Institute pruning standards and the use of best management practices. There are also issues related to staff resources that come into those considerations. As I mentioned, the City Council forwarded our staff recommendations to the Ordinance Committee, but then also requested that we go back to the Street Tree Advisory Committee and the Commission before we went to the Ordinance Committee for your specific consideration of these additional issues. With that, I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Downey.
The ANSI A300 pruning standard, well, let me first start. ANSI establishes standards for all businesses that do construction or manufacturing work. They regulate the safety rules that those businesses need to adhere to. The ANSI A300 pruning standard is written as a guide. It's different than the other standards in that it's written as a guide to follow in determining what you need to do for your trees. It requires that you set job objectives and write specific specifications that explain what it is that should be done with the trees. The best management practices document was established to define in standard language the terms and procedures listed in the ANSI standard. So it's a clarification document to say when you're going to thin a tree, this is what that means. So the Street Advisory Committee on March 5th had a lengthy discussion about these topics, the role of the municipal code in enforcement. Mr. Vincent went through a lengthy discussion about how the municipal code is enforced and how it's used as a tool. It's primarily used to say that you can't go beyond this point, and so that was a discussion that we had. The ANSI standard and BMP documents, how they would be used as an enforcement tool, and the difficulties in using a document that's designed to provide guidelines and specifications for individual jobs as the level at which we would enforce for the violations. There was a discussion about more stringent using a more stringent pruning standard than we have, and there was lots of discussion about whether or not those standards could be utilized well for an enforcement tool. Then the discussion went to whether, well, in the ANSI standard it talks about removing a percentage of foliage that should not be removed beyond a certain point. And that level is 1/4. Our current standard says, our current ordinance says, you shall not remove more than 1/3 of the size of a tree. And there was a discussion about percentage of foliage versus the size of the reduction and which would work best in the situation. Go back. Sorry. The pros and cons of 1/4 versus 1/3 size reduction, and what that meant as far as enforcement. Does it? How would that impact the enforcement if they decided to recommend changing it from 1/3 to 1/4 the size? Would that be a difficult enforcement step? Okay. Additionally, I'll mention if you have questions regarding the Street Advisory Committee's recommendations, one of the members is here for your questions, Mari Traman. The Street Advisory Committee recommendations were to generally concur with the staff changes to to Title 15 with some specific modifications. They wanted to change the size of the reduction from 1/3 to 1/4 to more closely match the ANSI standards. they wanted to require that when city issues a permit for work on city-owned trees, that the pruning be done in conformance with the ANSI standards and the best management practices documents. And they wanted to add, wanted the city to recommend when people make decisions about maintaining their trees in the setback or parking lots, that they consider these documents when making their pruning decisions. The document we mentioned as attachment 4 that you received this evening includes those recommendations from the Street Tree Advisory Committee. We discussed also the role of Street Tree Advisory Committee and how that would be formalized
by these improvements. The Street Tree Advisory Committee was first established by this board in 1979. Membership terms were updated in December 1998 to 3 voting members with 2-year terms and 2 alternate voting members. The Street Tree Advisory Committee has also expressed an interest to further discuss whether they want to change that to 5-member voting members, but that's in the future. We're not there yet. It is staff's recommendation that the Park and Recreation Commission review the proposed change to Title 15 of the Municipal Code and concur with the recommendations of the Street Tree Advisory Committee related to the use of the ANSI A300 pruning standard and best management practices. And if the Commission so desires, Mr. Vincent will go over those changes.
I think we so desire.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, my name is Scott Vincent. I'm an Assistant City Attorney in the City Attorney's Office, and I was the person who has drafted these most recent revisions to Chapters 1520 and 1524. Big over picture, Chapter 1520 concerns city trees, parkway trees, trees within parks, trees that are within setbacks, right-of-ways. Excuse me, not setbacks, but the right-of-way. General term, city trees. 1524 concerns private trees, trees that are on private property, and it has been explained earlier, front setback, or trees that are required by the zoning ordinance to be located in parking lots. To do any work or to remove any street tree by a private citizen has to have a permit. To do work on private trees that are regulated, the first step is it has to be within those 2 areas I just described. It has to be in a front setback, or it has to be within a parking lot as required by the zoning ordinance. That's the first element to whether or not regulation comes to play. The second part of the city's regulation is that we allow today under the current ordinance, and we're proposing a change to this, but we are proposing that there still will be a certain degree of work that a private property owner can do on a regulated tree or a tree that falls within those areas of their property without a city permit. Quite honestly, this comes down to an issue of staffing. It exempts a certain amount of work, and a certain number of trees can be worked on to a certain degree without having to get a city permit. It saves Tim and his staff the time for covering every potential action that a tree takes, every maintenance activity that a private property owner or their agents perform on these trees that would otherwise be regulated. One proposed change that was recommended by the Street Tree Advisory Committee and has been incorporated into the draft that has been presented to you tonight is that scope, which previously was 1/3 of the overall size of the tree, now this proposed draft tonight, one, tracks the ANSI standards with respect to the 1/4 and also incorporates ANSI standard, or it parallels ANSI standards with including a time period a 12-month period. The ANSI standards talk about best management practices regarding how much trimming to do within an annual growing season. So we've taken that concept and incorporated it into our regulation by having a 12-month period. We've paralleled and tracked the 1 quarter, so it's gone from 1/3 down to 1 quarter. And one other change that we made to the regulation or the ordinance is that we've redefined or we've clarified the overall size of the tree. We heard from members of the public and even the staff mentioned this, that people weren't always clear about what it meant to be the overall size of the tree. And there was this foliage question. So to clarify the overall size of the tree, we looked again to the ANSI standards for guidance and used the definition of the crown of the tree, and defined what our reduction would apply, or when a permit would be required, is if you reduce either the height or the spread of the crown using those definitions and incorporating those definitions into the ordinance. That we hope will clarify and make the ordinance a little more clear than the former overall size of the tree. With respect to the foliage question, I think Mr. Downey has already explained, and so I won't belabor the point much, is that our ordinance, and when we end up using this ordinance to enforce on an action, basically when a private property owner or their agents have done work on a tree that would have required a permit, we come to the situation after the fact. Either city staff or a citizen calls in on a complaint. And it is our opinion that if we were to incorporate a foliage standard, it would be much more difficult to enforce that foliage, to determine the amount of foliage that has been removed in that after-the-fact determination. Mr. Downey has explained to me that if in the after-the-fact determination, he can look at the size of the branches that are remaining and the cuts that have been made, and determining the nature of the tree, can make some calculations and determine whether the spread or height of the crown has been reduced to a point that the ordinance would have otherwise required a permit. And so that's why we've elected to go with the spread and height as opposed to amount of foliage. The balance of the changes are primarily to formalize the existence of the Street Tree Advisory Committee and their procedures. I think as you review your ordinance 1520, the changes to Chapter 1520 are almost exclusively procedural changes in incorporating and formalizing the existence and the operation of the Street Tree Advisory Committee. One substantive change that we have included in 1520 is the inclusion that of the requirement that not only does the party who does work, once they get a permit to work on a street tree, not only does that party have to provide insurance, but also, and may have to provide a bonding if required by the director,
The first is a discrepancy that seems to be pointed out in the staff report between standards for residential trimming going from 1/3 to 1/4, and city staff, which is requiring 1/3 removal or trimming on city trees. Am I reading the staff report correctly, that there's a discrepancy? I guess so. This would be Mr. Downey.
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Hockman, the city's budgetary restraints require us to provide an equal maintenance to all trees. If we were to go to a quarter standard, we would be significantly reducing our ability to maintain the vast number of trees that we have. We are not at this time recommending that city staff go to a quarter recommendation.
Well, so I guess my comment on that is that I'm a big fan of holding cities to the same standards that the rest of us are held to. So I'm concerned about reducing the standard to 1/4 for residents and leaving it at 1/3 for the city.
Commissioner Longstreet, Chair Hockman, or Commissioner Hockman, sorry.
Yeah.
These permits that we provide to citizens for doing work on city trees is in addition to the work the city already provides. We felt that it was appropriate to hold them to a standard because it would be an additional pruning beyond what the city does.
Okay. All right. And then I think my other question was largely the broad references to the Board of Park Commissioners. And I'm wondering, don't we later on our agenda talk about whether there's going to be a consolidation, and what would that do to this document? Would it have to come back for another change? Or...
Madam Chair, if I did look at the rest of the agenda, and I see that you are going to have that discussion later this evening. As we go forward with this, we'll be trying to anticipate any potential changes to the makeup or title of this commission. The references that are currently in this ordinance were actually revised in 2004 to match with the existing charter definitions, which and so that we will figure that out. Either that, if it's literally just the name of the body, the municipal code does allow the city clerk to make non-substantive ministerial changes. And so if it literally is just a change in the title of a commission without actually changing which commission it goes to, or somehow changing the substantive process, then I think that we could see that as a ministerial change, as well as if depending on how your commission votes today, and then also any action from the city council in the future, we'll be tracking that and making sure that they run parallel.
All right, and then I think my last question, even though I said that the previous one was my last question, regards the ANSI 300 codes or recommendations, and I'm just trying to get some sort of real idea as to how onerous they are and how prepared our city, the existing companies that do tree trimming are to right away just get into the swing of providing the verbal or written goals and objectives and complying with all of these standards, and how easy and or hard is it going to be for a citizen to actually know that the work that they're doing is legal?
Commissioner Longstreet, Chair Hockman, I did it again. Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Hockman, excuse me. I'm giving you a promotion there. The reference
for citizens to consider that document when they're making decisions is an effort to get the word out that these documents really are designed to figure out what's best for the trees. If the citizens embrace these documents and utilize these documents, that alone will significantly decrease our violations. The document is readily available. I obtained my latest copy in 2 days. The document will be, information about how to obtain the document will be placed on our website so that it makes it easier to locate.
I guess my question was not how easy is it to obtain the document, but how readily achievable is complying with the document given the state of tree trimming in Santa Barbara.
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Hockman. Got it right that time. The document is written in such a way that if you desired to pick it up and utilize the document and follow it along with the document, you could pretty concisely write down what you wanted your tree company to do. It's very clearly defined what each practice is and what's important to do.
I'm sorry. I still have just one more follow-up on this.
Is this your last
This is
last
this,
question?
well, it's based on the answer that we just got. As my, what I used to do was call a tree trimming company and say, "There's my tree, and you're the professional. Please trim the tree." And it now sounds like what you're saying is that it's now going to be our responsibility to write our own goals and objectives and tell the tree trimmer what to do. Is that what you're saying?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Hockman, our municipal code does not require that a citizen hire a tree company to do the work. It's simply, it's that simply written that the layman can understand it. The other aspect of this would be that the educational opportunity that we mentioned, we're going to invite companies to come in and learn all these things and get this information so that they can provide the proper information to their clients as well.
Thank you.
I think it might, if we have some questions for Mr. Vincent right now, but then we might want to take public comment and then really delve into the rest of our questions. Do we want to go to public comment? Street Tree Advisory Committee, did you have any comments? Okay. Then I'm going to call our Kathy Ann Brown, and Kathy Ann will be followed by Wes Brown. And then we'll follow up with Mr. DeForest. So Kathy Ann Brown, if you'd like to come up and...
Hello, thank you.
Hi.
Well, let's start right in on the ANSI standards. What does the ANSI A300 industry tree pruning standard do for our trees that the current ordinance or even the amended ordinance does not do? First, unless the city requires that pruners of city-regulated trees prune in accordance with the A300, these trees will continue to be damaged. We can tell property owners that there is a pruning standard that will protect their property and the value that their trees contribute to their property value if they choose to use it, but a recommended standard cannot be enforced. Trees will continue to be damaged. Heavy fines may discourage bad pruning, but is that the way the city wants to bring about change, with a heavy hand? Larger fines will be helpful, but I keep hearing that education is the key. I've heard the same thing for years, and I agree. The ANSI A300 is the best possible educational tool. And what is the best possible way to bring tree workers to school? By requiring them to come. Recommending or suggesting that people change their ways may, with luck, bring about some change slowly. Our urban forest has endured years of our best intentions to educate. What changes have we seen? The situation has gotten progressively worse. Now is the time to require that work on urban forest trees, all of them, street trees, park trees, setback trees, and trees in city-approved landscaping and parking lots, be performed in accordance with specifications that comply with the ANSI A300 standard. This is the standard that industry sets itself. What does the standard give us that the current or even the amended ordinance does not? First, it provides a common vocabulary of terms having to do with tree work. No miscommunication. 2, it provides descriptions and illustrations of safe pruning cuts. Every pruning cut is a wound. This section shows how to make a cut that will heal. It reduces the chance that pruning will end up creating hazardous trees. 3, it sets pruning limits for utility line pruning. 3 of the largest utility line pruning companies in the U.S., Asplund, Bartlett, and Davey, are represented on the Tree Care Industry Association committee that writes and updates the ANSI A300 standard in urban and residential areas. 4, it sets a standard for palm tree pruning. The ANSI standard is regularly updated, incorporating the latest scientific agricultural knowledge. The new in the 2008 ANSI edition is the requirement, for example, that palms not be pruned above the horizontal. Previously, live fronds could be removed to an angle of 45 degrees above horizontal. Our ordinance doesn't cover any of these things. But most important, it allows us a way to get out in front of violations. It allows us the means to stop violations and the damage of violations before they occur. We need to stop chasing violations and start making sure they don't happen in the first place. We need to educate tree pruners. How? By requiring that they not prune until they have established, as the ANSI A300 requires, a goal, a purpose, an objective, a reason to prune, and to have identified how that pruning goal will be achieved. What I am describing is a process whereby pruners will plan to prune a specific urban forest tree. They must first write out these specifications, their objective, the pruning methods they will use, and a statement that they will do their work in accordance with the ANSI A300 pruning standard. Our city arborist would vet their applications and issue them a license if their job description or specification is okay.
Can you wrap up?
I'm almost finished.
Right.
He will become their helper, not just the enforcer. He helps them avoid making mistakes. This program might cost the city more money, but you need to consider not just the cost of the program, but also the benefits. How much money are we wasting now, losing the value of our trees to bad pruning, and often losing the trees altogether? How much money are we wasting chasing violations when the dollars could be better spent stopping violations from occurring? Last paragraph. Thank you, Ms. Longstreet. How the program is applied is flexible. But unless you recommend the adoption of the ANSI A300 tree pruning standard as the standard that pruners must rise to, very little will change very slowly. We know this from the experience of the past many years. Let's not kick this problem down the road again. Require the pruning of all urban forest trees, those regulated by Chapter 1520 and by 1524, be performed in accordance with specifications written in compliance with the ANSI 300 industry standard. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brown?
Chairman Longstreet and particularly Commissioner Huffman, I would like a chance to address some of your questions. The International Society of Arboriculture is the group that prepared the ANSI standards and the best management practices. They also prepared a model ordinance for municipalities for the protection of trees, and I don't know whether this has guided the process here. But central to it is something Kathy Ann alluded to, the prevention of damage happening in the first place. The suggested procedure that has been adopted by other municipalities has been found effective and has been found legal, is that those who are going to work on trees under the jurisdiction of the city must be licensed by the city. That is, they come in, there's a point of contact. They receive at that point the ANSI standards and the best management practice documents. and they sign off when they pay for their license, I agree to work under these conditions. This is what I will do. So that if at some future point our arborist goes out and finds someone who has said, yes, I'm going to do this, and they have violated it, or if he finds someone who is out there trimming trees and doesn't have the license, they are automatically in violation. This gets ahead of the problem. This focuses the education on those who are actually doing the work. It is an efficient use of city resources. It focuses education on those who are doing hopefully good work, but too often damage. It reorders somewhat the priorities of the arborist's task. That is, he becomes the educator-in-chief and not just the enforcer. As I said before, this is a procedure that's been adopted by other municipalities. It has been found to be effective, legal, and I urge you to move beyond the language of we recommend and we suggest to the language of we require that the ANSI standards be followed. Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. DeForest.
Thank you, and good afternoon. It's still afternoon. I first want to commend that at last we're making some progress on tree preservation. There was some time here when trees, especially, we need to up, and as indicated, up the penalty phase. And I believe that on examination of Attachment 4, the revised ordinance did not have any penalties in it. And it just goes back to the penalties for the $100 penalty that the city provides for spitting on the sidewalk or something. So the penalty should be included in the ordinance for so that the readers of the ordinance or the will know what the penalties are. Obviously, the $100 penalties did not work, and people willy-nilly destroying trees in Santa Barbara and just paying the token fine of $100. Also missing in the attachment, in the proposed ordinance, is the protection of trees that are on historic landmark properties or structures of merit properties. This needs to be included, and an example of this is the Hunting Mansion where the owner took out all the trees. I mean, I know we got permission to do some of them from the city arborist, but no one seemed to realize that that structure on the corner of Santa Barbara Street in Isley is an historic landmark. And so there needs to be a section in this ordinance that protects the trees on historic landmarks and structures of merit property. Those trees are as historic as the structures themselves. I can see no reason why the ANSI pruning standards can't be mandatory, both for the city and for the, as has been pointed out, and for the private property. Enforcement tends to be complaint-driven, and most violations to the pruning ordinance are easily seen by even non-professionals. And you just saw an example of that in that slide of the magnolia tree. So, and to encourage, the city has to go along with the ANSI standards. to encourage the public to go along with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mr. DeForest brings up a question, and I was thinking of this too. In El Pueblo Viejo, any skyline tree is regulated under the HLC, isn't that correct?
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, one of the things that came out of our staff review of tree preservation, and it's not that it was any huge revelation for staff, but we have a large number of ways that trees and landscaping come into the purview of the city. With respect to Mr. DeForest's comment, trees within the El Pueblo Viejo and trees on landmark sites are subject to HLC review. Any alteration to the exterior of a landmark site or a site within the El Pueblo Viejo is regulated by Chapter 2222 of the Municipal Code. Those tools already exist. We didn't find any need to change those tools. In fact, those tools go well beyond what you're seeing in 1524.
Oh, I know.
I mean, and anyone who lives or owns property in El Pueblo Viejo knows. So it's not for a lack of tools. Regarding the comment concerning penalties, the penalties that you saw on the screen this afternoon will be adopted in a resolution that will go along with the administrative citation process. The administrative citation process is outlined in Chapter 1.25 of the Municipal Code. The penalties for misdemeanors, every violation of the Municipal Code can be prosecuted as either unless specified by that particular section otherwise, every violation of the Municipal Code is either a misdemeanor or an infraction prosecuted at the election of the City Attorney's Office. The penalties for misdemeanors are a $500 fine and up to 6 months in jail. The fines for infractions are the $100 that you heard of spoken earlier. The administrative citation process provides another process that is not criminal. It's not administered by the courts. It is administered by the city. It does, and the penalties that you saw earlier would be through the administrative citation process. The administrative citation process does have an appeal hearing, and it would allow a property owner, once they were noticed with an administrative fine for a violation, they would have an opportunity and would have due process regarding to speak their case. Ultimately, they could also appeal an administrative fine to the Superior Court, and there's a one-time hearing there that primarily is basically done on the administrative record prepared by the city.
Thank you. I should officially close the public hearing at this point, but do we on our website have mentioned that there are other tree regulations like El Pueblo Viejo, and could we add that if we do not so that it clarifies those? I think that is very important.
Chair Longstreet, the part of the education process, as we mentioned earlier in the slides, is to provide a lot of that information on the website, and we are proposing to do those.
Okay, so it's back to the Commission for discussion and questions. Mr. Burns.
First, just a quick question. You mentioned that if a tree is half of the tree is in the zone, whether it's 10 feet or 35 feet, then it's considered the entire tree is in the zone. And I'm just wondering at what height do you pick that? Is that in the ordinance?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Burns, the determination of whether a tree is in a setback, we had a lot of discussion about that in staff to decide, okay, the setback is measured from the back of right-of-way. If a tree falls on that line somewhere, when do we regulate that? We decided that if more than 50% of the trunk resides within the setback, then likely the tree was planted originally within that setback. So we determined that that would be the level that we would decide to call it a setback tree. The other measurement you reference is would be trees over 4 inches, and what we're proposing measured at diameter at breast height, which is 4.5 feet above the ground. So any tree larger than 4 inches that falls 50% within the setback would be regulated.
But I add to the reason I have that question. I have a tree on my property line that's half on my property line and half on a neighbor's property line, and we had a long discussion over 3 years over where is it actually half of my tree, half of his tree, and somewhere I read that it had to be at 40 inches or something. So I just see where we have a potential that we have a tree that ends up at an angle and 4 feet high, it's really not 50%. And I just, maybe you might want to get that behind us.
Here, Longstreet, Commissioner Burns, the measurement of 50% of the trunk would be at ground level. If 50% falls within the setback area, it would be regulated.
Madam Chair, I can add a little bit to this. The California Civil Code literally has a section that determines whose tree that is. And I'll go back and look at it. I believe I consulted that section when we drafted this, and I don't recall a height on that particular measurement, but I'll go back and look at it because, quite honestly, I want to use that section and the case law that have interpreted that section and applied that section as a way of giving us guidance in how we would apply our own definition. So I'll go back and look and make sure if there is a height where if the code section provides a height for that measurement, we'll incorporate that into the ordinance.
Rocky, did you have a question? Comment?
I have some comments, but first a question. In the comments from Mr. Brown and Ms. Brown, one thing that jumped out at me is there any particular reason not to include the ANSI standards as part of the licensing process?
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Hall, the city currently does not license tree businesses for tree work. And that would be an additional task that would have an impact on city staff.
So was the addition of a licensing program as part of this overall policy discussed by staff? And can you give a sort of sense of that discussion? I mean, I certainly understand the workload part of the issue.
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Hall, as an example, the City of Redwood City has not incorporated these ANSI standards into their municipal code. However, they have a permit requirement for any tree that falls within the city limits, no matter where it exists. You must obtain a permit to prune that tree. Part of that is you must use the ANSI standards to determine objectives and a trimming plan. If we were to adopt something similar to that, it would require much more review than we're prepared to provide at this point.
Other questions? Ms. Connor, did you have any?
I wanted to thank you for including the ANSI standards, and I'm wondering if the staff, do your tree trimmers have copies in the trucks, or I mean, are people reading this, or have do they look at it occasionally? I don't know what you're. Yeah.
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Connor, the staff is aware of the ANSI standards. They have not seen this latest version, and I do plan to share this version with them. And they are continually improving their knowledge about trees, and this is one part of that.
Thank you.
I have a question. Utility company pruning. I think the thing we get blamed for the most. Will this apply at all to utility company trimming within city limits?
Chair Longstreet, we're still looking into what rights the utility companies have, and at this time we're not proposing that it apply to them until we do some more investigation.
Okay, because that'd be a major concern that I have, is that, and it's almost from an equity standpoint that we come down very hard on residents, and the city tries its hardest to do the best job, and then the utility companies come through and just haircut everything. So,
Chair Longstreet and members of the commission, it's a really tough question. In fact, I think every public meeting we have on this topic, because we see what happens to some of the trees in our community. We have trees planted in the wrong place in some instances, and utility lines that need to be maintained if they're high voltage electric lines. And one of the things that our forestry staff do is try to work with Edison to the best of their ability to identify when a pruning job is done, when it can be rounded out a bit so it looks a little less lopsided, and then when there is a need to actually to replant a tree, to plant a species that's more appropriate for the location. When we are able to move forward with our tree urban forest management plan, that's something that we can look at in more detail, how over time we can actually have more appropriate trees in those locations.
okay, comments and action on this. Yeah, Mr. Burns.
Thank you. There was a comment of that whether we require the ANSI standards or suggest. Is there any thought that we go down the road of saying we're suggesting that, and that in 3 years or in an appropriate time we look at making it mandatory to see if that's a direction we want to go? And I don't know if there's been any thought on that.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Burns, the municipal code is something that, as you're well aware, changes over time depending on different circumstances. We have not decided if there's going to be a revisit to this particular item at any time frame, but as we proceed, we'll evaluate what we have, and when it becomes appropriate to make changes, we'll move those forward.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Burns, if I could add, if we move forward with these recommendations and they are forwarded to the City Council by the Ordinance Committee, and we adopt a new fine schedule, and we implement the education program, we're hoping over time we'll actually be able to see the effects of these changes. And if there continues to be, this came about as a result of some fairly egregious violations, and that's essentially what people are more likely to see, even though there are other violations that we would like to reduce. If at that time it appears that we need to take another step, I'm sure we will be considering that. But we will have information. We collect the information because it's in database, and we see over time how things change.
Thank you. Commissioner Larimore Hall.
So I'm very happy to see the discussion of the fine schedule because it just seems so obvious that if you're going to spend $1,000 to remove a tree illegally, like throwing another $100 on the cost is hardly prohibitive. I wonder though, and I also understand it completely makes sense to have a different schedule of fines for pruning versus removal for making the punishment, so to speak, fit the crime. I'm wondering though if the proposed fines for removal aren't in fact still too low, and whether it makes sense to have a kind of a graduation based on the size of the tree. In my mind, trees grow, they get bigger. Part of the long-term forestry policy in Santa Barbara is to think of not just what does the overall urban forest canopy look like now, but what's it going to look like in 100 years, et cetera. So like ripping out a tree that right now is quite small but is part of a long-term plan, if we're going to get more streets that look like the beautiful stretch downtown of Anapamu, which every time I riding along in it. I feel like I'm in a Tolkien film. If we're going to have more things like that, that takes long-term planning, et cetera. So in my mind, I think there should be a high fine for removing a tree, and I'm not sure that it makes sense to have it tied to the diameter of the tree at that given moment. Other than that, I really don't have the expertise to comment in more detail on the fine structure, but I'm very, very glad to see it up for discussion. Trying to get my head around this issue of how to integrate the ANSI standards with some teeth, because I'm definitely sympathetic to the spirit of some of the comments in public comment about. I'm always nervous whenever I see something where like, here's a good standard, and we'd really like it if you used it, sort of approach. That being said, I think that we have to work in the reality of the fact that people prune or remove trees themselves and not always utilizing a service, and that's that's going to be the way that it's going to be, and that there might be a kind of regressive or punitive unintended consequence of requiring that everyone use a professional service all the time. So I'm interested in how we can, through the permitting process rather than a licensing process, how through the permitting process we can find something that's in between these standards just being a sort of suggestion and making them, having someone even check a box as part of the permitting process saying, I've read this, this is how are the standards I'm going to use, and the comments made before, very well taken that, I hope, I'm not a tree trimmer, but I hope that these are things that are, and it sounds like they are, things that are humanly possible to follow and that aren't overly onerous. So I guess, yeah, I would like to see something that's somewhere in between a suggestion and, moving to a whole different regime about who we allow to touch any trees in the city of Santa Barbara. That might be just impractical. Lastly, on the question of the standards, a slightly different standard for the city, the work that the city does, and what we require of private homeowners. I mean, I think it's well taken and it's pithy to say that there should be the same standards for everyone, but I do think we need to recognize that the city has a serious resource issue and has a responsibility for equal maintenance throughout the city, regardless of what part of the city it is, regardless of where the park is located or where the street trees are located. That private owners, just by definition, don't have. We heard earlier today it was kind of private property owners can make a decision like I'm going to spend $18,000 to save a wall. And that's fine, and that's their right, and they have the money, and it's their property. But the city obviously has a much more complicated balance to keep in mind in terms of spending resources. So it makes sense to me that there would be a slightly different standard for how the city is operating in terms of this than there is for an individual property owner. Completely well taken, and that can get way out of control. The last thing I would, just to wrap up, I'm always impressed and appreciative when private property owners come before this commission with, requesting to do something to remove a tree on their private property, and they play by the rules, and they ask for permission, and, it's at least on my tenure, most of the time their request is denied, and they play by the rules. So having a aggressive fine structure, having a process that educates people about how they can best be stewards of the trees on their property, to me, is only fair to those people who play by the rules and come here and have their request denied. It really flies in the face of that, kind of communal spirit and that good citizenship if at the end of the day, you can just go and rip out a tree on your private property and pay a tiny little bit of money, and it's no big deal. So I'm really glad to see us moving in a better direction on that.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, if I may make a couple comments towards Commissioner Larimore Hall's comment regarding the ANSI standards and how we can incorporate it into the permitting process. in the revisions that are proposed for Chapter 1520 for the city trees. Historically, a property owner, a private citizen who wanted to work on a city tree has to get a permit, had to provide insurance. In addition to that requirement, we are adding that they do the work to the ANSI standards. So we are incorporating the ANSI standards as requested by the members of the public into private property owners working on city trees. Private trees, 1524. There's only two circumstances where you need a permit. One is for the removal of the tree. We haven't incorporated the ANSI standards there. Maybe there are some standards regarding the proper removal, but a removal is a removal. You can get a permit in cases where the tree poses a potential danger to persons or property due to age, disease, storm, fire, or injury. In those cases, we require a permit. The property owner must first have a written report prepared by an arborist presented to the city, and in order to get the permit, the City Parks and Recreation Department assesses the condition of the tree, approves the proposed work as comporting with the sound cultural practices as specified in the ANSI standards. So to the degree that we issue permits, we have incorporated the ANSI standards. It's the real debate now is how much further can we afford to expand our permitting process. The revisions that are before you today, when a permit is required for the work, we have incorporated the ANSI standards.
Thank you. That does clarify it. And I understand that, if money were not an issue, if the world were a perfect place, we would be able to, regulate how everybody trims every tree. And that is not the world we live in, and it isn't. We're not living in that world in the next 5 years either. So I think it is also unrealistic of us to set up regulations that we in no way can enforce, because then we're back to where we are right now, which is there's no teeth in what we do, and that's what we're trying to change to be, better. So I thank you for clarifying the part about the ANSI standards and all of that. I still, the 1/3, 1/4, I can accept that on the street trees that because they are trimmed by the city at some point also, that it is just an extra step towards it. And I am comfortable with the recommendations as they stand, and I would recommend them on to the ordinance committee. And I don't know how anybody else feels about it. So, other comments? Are we ready for some action? Is there a motion?
Let me make a second if that was a motion. And if it wasn't, then
we
I will
can
make
say
a
that's a motion. We can make, okay, we can say that's a motion and you can second.
That's a second.
All right. So we have a motion on the floor to accept the recommendation as presented by staff. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. And I appreciate all the hard work and input from the public and the Street Tree Advisory Committee. And I would be comfortable having those things referenced in the El Pueblo Viejo district. And I don't know if it's possible to reference them in the code that, there, or however that works, so that people don't get confused, read one place and think they're done.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, the staff has discussed a cross-referencing process. We're trying to figure out an artful way of doing that because, quite honestly, the municipal code is somewhere close to 800 pages long. And if we got into the business of cross-referencing everything that starts pertaining to one another, it would be 1,000-page long. So we're trying to find an artful solution to that. We don't want people we want to get people to understand and know the rules so that we don't get into, particularly in the case of ignorance. I mean, we'd hate to have a situation where a property owner wants to do the right thing but doesn't know what that is. And so we really do, part of the staff proposal is to have this outreach, and to the degree that it makes some sense and we can incorporate some cross-references or just references in the municipal code so that people can find these sections, we're going to do that as well.
And it may be even as simple as something in the water bills that say, here's what pertains to trees, and for more information, call if you're getting ready for a removal. Thank you very much, everyone, for all your input. Yeah, I think at this point we will take a 5-minute break.
You must believe in love and
I will call back to order the Parks and Recreation Commission, and we will now go to item 6, which is the Integrated Pest Management Annual Report.
Well, good afternoon, Chair Longstreet, Commissioners. I'm Santos Escobar, City of Santa Barbara Parks and Recreation Department Parks Manager, and also the city's IPM Coordinator. And today I'm here to present our Integrated Pest Management 2008 Annual Report. Believe it or not, this is our 5th time reporting on our IPM report. So here we go. Just as a quick one, Integrated Pest Management, or IPM, is an effective and environmentally sensitive decision-making system of pest management, and the goal is to minimize health and environmental and financial risk. IPM strategy. The IPM strategy was adopted in 2004, and it's citywide. The purpose of the program is to ensure that the city reduces and eliminates the use of pesticide products that can cause cancer, likely or probably human health or environmental risk, and promote the use of non-hazardous and reduced risk alternatives that are protective of human health and the environment. The pesticide hazard and exposure reduction model was adopted in 2006. It was adopted by City Council. We went through and adopted a zone system. The fair zone assigns areas as green, yellow, or special circumstance or red zones, and allows the use of carefully screened materials by zone designations. And it's also the used to based upon potential for exposure by human and sensitive habitat to hazardous pesticides as well. Our city highlights. This past 2008, we had a reduction of 31%. 1,646 units was decreased to 1,032 from the previous year. The use of green materials, however, increased from 43 units to 239 units. The use of yellow materials decreased from 1,570 to 686. The units of red material decreased from 32 to 25. And overall, the number of times that pesticides were applied in our city reduced from 269 to 160. And on this bar graph, you can tell the reductions. Gradual downturn. However, I just want to make note that every year could be a little different. Just depending on pest outbreaks, rain outfall, just don't know. Airport Department highlights. Applications of Alticid XR, and this is to control mosquitoes, decreased from 1,153 units to 621 units. The applications of Ditrac for rodent control were reduced from 197 to 33 units. 15,000 labor hours were spent performing weed control. The applications of yellow material, Roundup, and Surflan also decreased from 140 units to 137 units. And also, just as you're well aware, an exemption of Termidor was granted for treatment and infestation of subterranean termites in one of the airport buildings. And as you can tell here, this is a very large reduction in regards to pesticide use at the airport. Golf Division highlights the use of pesticides applied increased from 12 to 29 units. The Units of yellow material, this is Roundup use in regards to going through and ringing trees, was decreased from 11 units to 5. Units of red materials increased significantly from 1 to 24, and this was because of just the unusual high rainfall, and our golf greens required additional fungicide use in order to go through and make those viable. And just so you're well aware, the golf division continues to brew microorganism and compost teas for greens. And this past year, over 1,200 gallons were used for golf greens in order to keep them healthy as well. Parks Division highlights. The units of pesticides applied increased from 17 to 78. The units of green materials increased from 12 to 40. And the majority of that increase was to go through and control mosquitoes at the bird refuge. The units of yellow material increased from 6 to 38. And that increase was due to controlling squirrels at Shoreline Park. No red materials were used. We did go through and do a lot of infrastructure work, applying concrete mow strips. 3,587 linear feet were applied in our park system, and staff applied over 2,000 yards of mulch to control weeds. Public Works Department highlights. Public Works Department highlights. This includes environmental services. It includes building maintenance. It includes parking lots. And units of pesticides applied increased from 2 to 28. The units of green material increased from 0.5 to 20, once again for mosquito control. The use of yellow materials increased from 1 to 8. This is for areas in building maintenance where we had the majority of this was in actual traps, little like roach hotel items and cupboards and such. And also the use of red materials also increased, and this is just minute also, once again, in little bait stations as well. And you can tell just the reductions there as well.
Consistently, 2006 was a difficult year, wasn't it?
It was.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken in that, is that that was a problem with a contractor. And so once that was realized, it was addressed immediately in the contract management, and that's why the numbers went right back down.
So in March 9th, we had our Citizens IPM Advisory Committee voted unanimously to approve the IPM 2008 annual report. And within your packet is a nice letter explaining all the positive items that our IPM strategy and Fair Zone has produced over the past 5 years. On March 18th, the Airport Commission also voted to recommend that City Council accept the IPM 2008 annual report as well. And tonight, we're recommending that the Parks and Recreation Commission recommend that City Council accept the Integrated Pest Management 2008 annual report. And for Chair Longstreet, I know you love photos. Here we go. I got a couple for you.
I do like the pictures.
You can tell on the left-hand corner, as opposed to going through and using a Roundup to do stump control, we're here grinding our stumps. And down at the right-hand corner is our AC Pastel Memorial Rose Garden, and we're applying mulch. Mulching all our beds. To the left-hand side is here we are being green and going through and knocking down weeds. And also on the right-hand side is Alice Keck Memorial Garden. We're doing the same thing, going through and weeding out materials. This is at McKenzie Park, applying concrete mow strips. And here's
Mr. Escobar, just for the benefit of our new commissioners, could you just talk about why the mow strips are important as an IPM tool?
in regards to the concrete mow strips that you'll be seeing in our parks when you make trips to it and visit it, is the mow strip actually to the left-hand side where you see the gentleman going through and putting in an expansion joint, you have a planter bed. And what we're trying to do is encourage the turf on the right-hand side from encroaching into a planter bed. So our plan now is on the left-hand side of the planter bed is to go through and rogue all that out, and I'm hoping that Commissioner DeRocca and his group of friends can come out and help us out again.
You lay concrete on the side?
You don't want to know all the things I do on the side.
And even though this is a 2008 report, this is happening just today as we speak, and this is goats for weed control, IPM control, without having to use materials. We're here at Schofield Park. We have some goat controlling our weeds, and we're working on a pilot project on 7 acres of land. This is very steep terrain as well.
Ms. Connor?
Field trip.
Yeah, we can have a field trip. And on the upper left-hand corner is Willow Glen Park, and we are actually putting out worm gold in order to control the giant whitefly on these large xylosma shrubs that turn into trees. And on the right-hand bottom corner is Garden and Cabrillo Boulevard, and here we're doing a sustainable landscape job to beautify our entrance into our city. And that concludes my report. If you have any questions, today I have with us Mr. Jeff McKee from the airport, who's the IPM coordinator, as well as Mr. Mark Reed, the golf course manager, who's also the golf IPM coordinator. So, yeah.
Thank you for coming, gentlemen. Did you want to make any comments or just here for questions? Okay. I'd just like to commend staff. Every year it does get better. You know, remembering when we started out, and there was a lot of fear about what the parks would look like and how it would go, but I think everyone's embraced it, and the city's provided good leadership in this department, and very happy with the results. I think it's healthier for everybody. But the squirrels, I read the report, and I think that is a reasonable thing to say, that there is going to come a time when we need to knock down that population up there, and nothing else seems to be working. I know you trapped for a long time.
Chair Longstreet, yeah, we still continue to trap at Shoreline, at Chase Palm Park expansion, at Chase Palm Park. We're still doing that, and we will have to go back and ask for an exemption in order to apply some other materials to get a handle on this. So that's the plan.
Maybe we can you've got the goats. Maybe we just need to bring in the hawks or the barn owls or something.
Well, we still have a few of those in our park system, so they're still there.
Yeah. Other questions?
When I read the report, I had a question which I hope that other people can answer, and it's from at the airport, almost over 15,000 hours of hand weeding, and it didn't seem that we would need that because there's not really kids playing at the airport, but there's more to it than that. I wonder if you could expand upon that.
Yeah. Come on.
We didn't want you to sit here for nothing.
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Burns. I'm Jeff McKee from the airport. I'm the Environmental Compliance Officer. As you may know, we've done some rather large capital projects at the airport lately, and as part of those projects, as mitigation for the environmental impact of those projects, we've done some large native habitat restoration. And many of the hours, actually over 93% of the hours that we reported, those 15,834, are devoted to manual weed control in those native habitat restoration areas. There are about 45 acres that we're currently maintaining. Those hours are typically cyclical. The first few years we devote more hours, and then as we get more cover by the native vegetation, those hours decline. And by the 7th year, if our restoration is successful, we're no longer required to maintain those sites.
The native habitats you're speaking of, is that off on the side by Atlantic, in that area?
The project, the largest project that we've recently done is the relocation of the runway to create the safety areas, and we relocated Teclatito Creek as part of that project. So A lot of the restoration areas are right along Teclatito Creek and in what we call Area I, which is over close to UCSB, just below the bluff at UCSB.
Right. Okay, I fly out of Atlantic a lot, and I've noticed what you're doing. It looks good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Yes.
So I don't know if I have a request for more information now or a request for information in the 2009 IPM report, but I'm very interested in, I know there was discussion of this a lot more a few years ago as this program was just getting off the ground, but I'm very interested in what the what the impact is on labor hours as a result of changing our pest control practices. And I feel like in previous years there was some kind of more specific or numerical reflection of that or information about that, and it's not in this year's. The reason that that's incredibly important, I think, now is to look at it as a kind of baseline for moving forward this year with the budget cuts that we're expecting down the pike. Am I missing something in this report in terms of this year? And I guess the second part of it is what I'd love to see in next year's report is as much of a breakdown as possible in terms of what implementing these policies, which are great policies and we all support, means for the workload of park staff in particular, and then what staffing or budget cuts affect that next year.
Chair Longstreet, Commissioner Larimer Hall, you actually are missing something, and it's on page number 20, and it's our alternative pest management practices used in 2008. And it's all broken down in regards to citywide staff hours, contract hours, in regards to all the alternatives that we do use for IPM without having to go through and use chemical means.
So 5,106 hours in parks.
Correct.
Man hours, okay.
And I think I would like to add some additional comments that maybe get more at what I think the purpose behind your question was, if I may. When the program was adopted, the department did go through a very extensive analysis for how we operated before and the change in the impact on workload and with the IPM program. And this was after the first year of implementation is when we came back with this. And if I recall correctly, we determined that the increase in work effort was the equivalent of 2 or 3 FTE. Do you remember?
Yeah, the workload increase was actually an additional 3 full-time equivalent. And in regards to using Roundup use, it was a 6-to-1 ratio in regards to where we were at. Because at one time, if you recall, we were using over 45 gallons of Roundup, and now we're down to 3 to 4 gallons of Roundup per year.
So since that time, Council has approved the addition of 2 positions. One was added last year. One was added the previous year or the year before. But actually what was added at that time was 1 position plus hourly plus the purchase of equipment to support the green team. And so that effort. And so I think the other thing that has happened over time is that our park staff, a lot of what they do now is just, it's so ingrained and enmeshed into what we do and how we do our maintenance. So that's become very that's an important factor. I do think that the Commission will want to revisit the question that Commissioner Larimore Hall is asking, which is what will be the impact of the budget reductions on IPM? Because we have identified in our service impacts our progress with this program, it will be slowed, and we will most likely see an increase in the use of some materials that we haven't had to use because we will have less staff available and we'll need to do that. It doesn't mean that we're not still committed to all of the goals of the IPM program, but the reality is with less staff and the need for us to maintain the parks at a certain level, we probably will see
hoping we can use this as a level to get more volunteers to do things to help the paid staff.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Burns, expanding the volunteering in our parks has been a gradual effort over recent years. We will continue to do that. The Rose Garden is actually one of our standout gold star programs where we do have a significant, I mean, we wouldn't have the Rose Garden without our volunteers. But we recognize the need to work with more neighborhoods and have them do volunteer time in our parks. So it is something that we will revisit again as a discussion as part of budget.
Okay. Do you have a question, Mr. Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's
Welcome.
some good news. Thank you. And that brings us.
Do we need a motion?
Oh, we need to. Yeah, we need to accept this report.
Yeah, so I'll move that I'll move acceptance of the IPM 2008 annual report and recommendation that report be forwarded to City Council.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. Thank you. And now we come to our co-sponsorship report. This, I think, comes out of our budget discussions and the importance of our partners. And thank you for putting this together.
Yes, Commissioners, I've asked Sarah Hanna, our Recreation Programs Manager, just to give you an overview of the existing co-sponsorships, how they come about, what we look in them, because again, I do believe that this will be part of our discussion through the budget process.
Oh, new. It's a new speaker. Haven't been here in a while. Got to move it up just a touch.
Oh, well, we won't let you stay away so long.
I love coming to see you. I don't have any pictures today, though. I'm sorry. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the purpose of the agreements. Mrs. McCaffrey did a written report that touched on some highlights, but I wanted to add a little bit more information. And also the reasons behind the purpose. So to begin with, we do want to assist organizations in the development of recreation programs. This assists us in adding diversity and more programs to what we do and what we have available to offer. We also provide and enhance programs at a reduced cost through collaborations. It allows us to keep programs more affordable, and often collaborations bring in programming that is free to citizens.
By sharing resources, it expands our services in a more efficient way. We are able to bring resources from both groups together and stretch our assets, provide longer programs, more programs again. And it's really our emphasis to collaborate with organizations that have similar missions to us, that support healthy, active, interesting lifestyles. So for those reasons, we really have a strong co-sponsorship program. So I'd like to let you know a little bit more about the types of organizations we work with and how co-sponsorships are created. Some of the different types of partners that we have are educational institutions, the nonprofits, many sport organizations, many social service agencies, art and leisure organizations, of which I would like to add to cultural organizations, and special event organizers. When we sit down to look at a co-sponsorship, we take many different types of resources into consideration when we begin the dialogue. It includes the facilities, the volunteers and the staff that are available, publicity avenues, vehicles that may be shared, equipment that may be shared, and providers of insurance. So how might this process get started? Usually it's a phone call or an email to Nancy or to myself or to one of the other managers in the department. Or it could come to a front desk staff person, and so whoever receives the inquiry directs it to a staff that is knowledgeable about this area of the co-sponsorship. We meet with the organizer and begin to flesh out what types of concepts, what they're thinking of bringing, and what we could provide. So we sit down and we develop a purpose for the co-sponsorship, the possible benefits that will enhance what we're doing, and reasons that we would want to enter into a co-sponsorship, and the terms of the co-sponsorship. When we develop terms, we are very specific about our terms. We want to make sure that they're achievable and that the person that we are co-sponsoring with understands their obligation to fulfill their part of the bargain. We take a careful consideration into the value, what we are offering, perhaps a facility or vehicle use, and what they are bringing, what resources they are bringing to the relationship. And we try to balance the resources so that they're equally exchanged. The resources of the city are owned by citizens, and we want to do a good job in making sure we don't give our resources away. So we do challenge co-sponsors to bring in resources equally. We also, when we consider use of facilities, many of our facilities are revenue generating. So we do take into consideration what are the down times or the dead times, and what's the prime time, and we try to direct co-sponsors into the non-prime time use to fill up our facilities, but save some of the revenue generating times for the opportunities for rentals and other organizations that can pay. We do also hold co-sponsors to the same standard that we hold staff and each other, both ethically and through that they need to maintain the code of conduct in the same way that our staff and citizens are asked to uphold to. And in working with children, if they are working in a capacity that supervises children, we do require them to get criminal record checks and fingerprinting as we do staff. So after we've spent some time, usually it doesn't take very long, we try to do it pretty quickly, setting up the purpose, the benefits and terms. It's reviewed by the city attorney, and then the agreement is approved both by the Parks and Recreation Director and the organization's board of directors. Usually there's a board of directors. Sometimes it's an individual that has their own nonprofit, but generally it's with the people. And then we route for signatures, city attorney's office, risk manager, city clerk, get the signatures on there, and then as quickly as possible, schedule the programs and get going. One thing I wanted to say that whenever we renew co-sponsorships, we do evaluate the services and was the program successful? Did they say what they were going to do got done? Were there any changes that we need to do? So we annually will review and evaluate the services to see if we want to proceed with a co-sponsor each year. So Judith indicated there was 17 co-sponsors at this time. Over the years, it grows, waxes and wanes in the number of organizations that we're working with. Generally, it's around 20 or so. As you can see, it's a very varied group of types of organizations that we work with. We value all of their commitment to providing additional services to the citizens of our community. We value the diversity, and co-sponsorships allow us to do a lot more. We welcome them, and anyone out there in watching us on TV, if you have an organization that you think might be of interest to citizens and you can bring something to the city to work with, a resource, and we can work together, we're interested in having more collaborations. We think it's good for the community. It allows us to do more. And if I could steal the acronym, I don't know who put this acronym together of TEAM, but together everyone achieves more. And, we're committed to that as a department and look forward to more collaborations in the future. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just looked down. The one that just kind of stands out to me always is the lawn bowls. We can provide the space, but what would it be like if we had to run the program? And you have active people that are interested and care, and it's a perfect marriage there and we can support that program. But I don't think we would keep both the clubs open if it'd be something that'd be on the chopping block for us, quite frankly, if we had staff involved. But it's but it's nice that the volunteers then take it on. It's an important part of what we do. Mr. Hockman, did you?
I do. Thank you, Chair Longstreet. Hi. I'm wondering on these co-sponsorships, the co-participatory programs, are they designed to be revenue neutral? Are they profitable in any sense? Do we lose money on them?
Chair Longstreet and Commissioner Hockman, some of the co-sponsorships do involve fees, such as, let me think of one, like Pony League Baseball. We have we provide the fields. They provide with some capital improvements, usually an equal value of what the rental for the field would cost. Yet when they have to conduct their program, they do charge fees for uniforms, for the umpires, for the coaching, and for some of their other costs. So some co-sponsors do have fees for their programs, but because we are able to share, resources, it keeps their fees at a lower level than if they were paying the city to use the fields. Then it would probably bump everything up 30% or more. So we gain, they gain, everyone that's playing gains.
Other questions? Mr. Burns.
A comment and then a question. A comment is actually on lawn bowling, not that I am a participant. We have people that are ranked nationally that participate in Santa Barbara, and it's just amazing. I never knew that. But just another question is AYSO. Have they worked with us in the past? It just seems to be somehow a natural, but I don't see them on the chart.
I don't think we have fields.
Yeah, a couple of things. We do rent our fields for a profit and also to put money back into the fields to maintain them. The field rental rates are fairly nominal, like $15 an hour for a youth group. AYSO has programming from Goleta all the way to the Carpinteria end, and there are fields throughout the area, both on city property, on district property, and on county property, where teams are playing. We haven't had, there could be a relationship developed. It would be, you'd have to take into consideration, though, that there are many soccer organizations out there, several, and adult organizations, so we'd have to really figure out how it would be fair for all. If we set up a co-sponsorship with one, then there may be others that would want the same consideration. So,
and historically with soccer, as I recall, many years ago when we were doing the field study, we did convene a soccer coalition, so to speak, of all the different user groups and got them talking, and that ended up, we had our field assessment at that point, and I think that was probably 12 years ago or a long time ago.
Actually, the group continued to meet probably up until 6 years ago, and then basically, and I mean, part of the bringing the group together to convene them was to talk about the issues, and eventually the issues split the coalition. So our commitment was to all of the groups to work to have a fair access to fields by all of the groups. And that's really what we've strived for over the years.
Are we still in association with the school district on the rentals of their
Yes.
fields?
Yes.
See, that's the other thing, is we work with the school district to coordinate the uses. So,
and that would be good for us when we take that forward to the council. We'll bring that and describe that program again.
okay. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. It's good to find out what we're doing out there. And that brings us to item 9, proposed charter amendment to consolidate the Board of Park Commissioners and Recreation Commissioners and change the membership of the Park and Recreation Commission. And this is quite a historic item. Ms. Rapp.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, this was last on your agenda at December 2007, and we brought it forward at that time because the city was considering taking various charter amendments
for the November election. So, I'm bringing this issue back to you, even though the commission gave direction back in 2007, but I think it's important for you to revisit and see if in this time frame this is something that you want to still go forward with. In a nutshell, when the city charter was drafted, and we had a separate Parks Commission and a Recreation Commission, so the proposal is to officially combine them into the Park and Recreation Commission. Additionally, each board has had 5 members, and for many years, when it was the Park and Recreation Commission, there were 5 appointed to each commission, but 3 of them appointed to both. And it was very confusing. And we would have commissioners getting up and leaving in the middle of meetings, and it was very awkward.
Very interesting. We convened an agenda of the Recreation or the Parks Commission of 5 people. The 2 Recreation Commissioners joined us. We adjourned one meeting and convened as the Park and Recreation. Then that end left, the Parks people left. We had 3 separate agendas every night.
though it's very confusing. So the recommendation has been, which has not been controversial, to just incorporate them all into one. But that gets to the number of commissioners. So 2 of the commissioners on the existing commission have had experience on serving when the commission had more commissioners. When I should have closed the loop on the conversation. So currently, all 5 of the current commissioners are appointed to each commission. So you are actually serving on 2 commissions, 2 for the price of 1. So that's how it works. Yeah, that's right. That's it. So the question remains for the commission, assuming that you do want to go forward with consolidating the 2 commissions and cleaning that up. But the question remains whether the commission wants to retain the commission at 5 members or whether you want to expand to 7. I would just caution you that I think that you should feel very confident if you're going to act to change the membership, because there will be limited opportunity to change it until such time as the city goes forward with additional charter amendments, which may be several years. So I will let the existing commissioners that have had that experience talk about what some of the concerns were when the commission talked about this previously, and then we're happy to take whatever your recommendation is. We'll draft that language and forward it on to the city clerk's office, and then we'll keep you informed if in fact this is going to go forward as part of the November ballot.
Oh, okay, I'll start. My concerns on a 5-person commission is that some of the things we deal with and meeting monthly, when we have only 4 commissioners, when there's been times we've sat with just 3, there are items that need to be discussed before more than 3 people. And we've had some times when it's been really uncomfortable and I would say not conducive to good decision making. The other thing is we used to have a better representation of parks. And part of that was because we had a separate Parks Commission and people came to that who were interested in parks. And right now, we really, since we've combined, have lacked that expertise. I don't know that this necessarily will completely solve it, but I would like to see us have some horticultural expertise on our board. I'm not saying I think we do a bad job or anything, but that if you look at some of the other commissions where they have a landscape architect and an architect, whatever their purview is, they have that sort of expertise of the person who looks at those plans that are rolled out before us, let's say an example being West Beach, has some expertise in reading the plans, and has some really pertinent comments to that. And I think we do pretty okay in some of it, but we could do better. So I just feel that the breadth of our purview, what we do, we could incorporate 2 more people quite easily to make the decisions and better represent the city. Now, I will also say when I started on this commission, it was a whole different commission. It was dominated by older men, and it's changed. So I think we better represent who the community is now. But I think the more people we can incorporate on this board, the better the decisions we will make.
I agree with everything that you just said, having gone through the process with Bibi. One thing that I might add in favor of expanding is that we've been at times where we didn't have a quorum. And I remember there were times we had to cancel a meeting or 2 because we had only 5 people and 3 couldn't attend. So there went the meeting. And there were issues that we needed to face and deal with, and we had to cancel. So that would be my addition to Chair Longstreet's comments, and I agree with expanding the commission.
Okay, now let's hear the other, if there's any, what's other people's feelings on that? Mr. Hoffman.
Hi there. Thank you, Chair Longstreet. Well, first of all, we've been silent on the first issue. I'm going to, of course, be in favor of renaming and combining the commissions. I think that's sort of a given. I have the experience of coming from many different boards, and one in particular that stands out is the Creeks Committee, which started out with 9 people in it. And for me, that was completely ineffective. It brings up problems on the other side. And 7 is not 9, but 7 is not 5 also. And so my concerns with going to 7, and I'm not completely sold that these are concerns that would stand in the way, while you do get diversity, having more people, this is a fairly long meeting right now. We have fairly hefty agendae sometime, and you add 2 more people, you add to the length of the meeting. Because when people want to have a say about the different items, you're extending the possibility of the discussion time. So it's something to talk about, or at least to be aware of. Also, it could be more difficult to gain consensus on issues when there are more people, depending on the mix of the people that you get. And I have been on commissions or committees where the mix didn't fit well, and then the more people you get, the harder it becomes, and it's not a fun committee to be on. I have, just in my few meetings with this group, enjoyed the, I'll call it intimate nature of the discussions that we have, because I think we get quickly to the meat of the matters, and I think that's something that's very valuable as well. So those are some thoughts to throw out there.
I'm at best lukewarm about expanding the number. The quorum issue cuts both ways. A larger committee doesn't necessarily make it easier to get to achieve a quorum. The one thing that I like about expansion, or actually, it doesn't matter whether we expand it or not, but the one thing that has been discussed in the past, and I know is something that staff has thrown around, if there's going to be a charter amendment on the kind of makeup of this commission, I think that we should mandate that one of the members be a youth, that a commissioner, a voting member of the commission, be under 25, if that is possible legally. I'm not sure what the difference is between commissions and advisory groups in terms of, advisory groups tend to have very specific constituencies sort of allotted for each seat. I'm not sure of the legality around that with a commission, but as Chair Longstreet was saying, it would be good to at least think about, on an expanded committee or not, having certain constituencies or certain areas of expertise be kind of built into the way that we bring people onto the commission. I think that can be overdone. There's a lot of danger in going too far with that. But the one thing that I think is absolutely clear because of the work that we do and because of the example that we've been trying to set for the city is that I think that at least one member of the commission should be a youth, and they should be a voting member.
I'm speaking for the 2 people that aren't here, so I'll speak a little longer than I normally do. A picture's worth 1,000 words. When I first, I'm a new member, and I didn't realize the time commitment on the advisory committees, but after I'm now 3 months into it, it isn't that big of a commitment. And I think I'm on 4 liaisons for 4 committees now, and maybe I'd end up being liaison for 3. I agree that every time you get here in front of a dais, you feel like you need to speak, and I just think that it could run longer. And I mean, the other thing is, it's a commitment that I made, and I'm sure we all made. There always will be an exception, but you know, the fourth Wednesday of the month, 4 o'clock, I'm here. So I don't think, with the budget issues we've got, I don't know if we want to spend staff time tweaking something if it isn't broken. And so that's my, you know, my thoughts, as such as they are.
Chair Longstreet and Commissioners, if I could address some of the comments that Commissioner Larimore Hall made, and then also Commissioner Burns. And I'll start with the issue of the number of advisory committees. The department currently has 17 advisory committees. It is staff's recommendation when we bring the budget forward to you that the commission significantly look at significantly reducing the number of advisory committees into more effective, workable groups that provide the information that the commission needs from the community, and that some of our advisory committees have really morphed into working committees that staff use that are really collaboration committees that have representatives from, for instance, in adapted recreation. They have representatives from the different service providers in the community, and really the focus of their program is really, the focus of their meetings is really talking about what do we do for the population of the community that has disabilities, and a little less to recommendations to the commission, and it's more of a working committee. So our recommendation will be that the commission, and we'll come back to you with a report, whether it's before the budget is adopted or after, but I do think that reducing the number of advisory committees is I think it's the right thing to do when we look at the staff time to be the staff liaison and all of the aspects to some of our advisory committees don't even meet anymore because they can't, members don't feel like there's anything productive for them to do, and that means we shouldn't be doing that. So that's one thing. The second thing, to address the issue of appointing a youth to the commission and making them a voting member. I'm not certain that there are any legal issues, so I'll defer that to the city attorney, but I know that, and maybe Ms. Hanna can contribute to this conversation, that actually the Council Committee on Youth and Children, which includes Mayor Bloom and Councilmember Williams and Councilmember Horton, have asked and have created a subcommittee to look at how to improve more youth voice in various city boards and commissions. And so part of that discussion was, you know, using the Park and Recreation Commission as an example, we've had a youth intern, some more comfortable and effective than others. The current youth intern is very engaged, and it's really wonderful to see. Others have not been that way because I think they lack that comfort level, and we're trying to do what we can to improve their experience. But I do believe that if the commission wanted to make that change and, you know, propose or recommend to City Council that that one of the members be a youth member, whatever age bracket you want to use, I believe that we could do that. The one consideration that I might suggest to you is, in that case, if you were going to do that, you might want to think about going to 7 members and having a youth and then an additional adult, because I think for the breadth of discussion, I think it's important that, you know, we have a good representation of adult commissioners as well. So, but I do believe that that is possible if the commission would like to do that.
The other part of that, if we have a youth as a commissioner, I wouldn't feel like it would be fair to assume that they would be able to do a 4-year term. We've always had our youth interns at a year at a time. But at that age, your life changes and your commitments change. So I think as an official member of the commission, we'd want to make sure we buffered that somehow, like you say, going to 7.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
If I may also, I would be a little bit concerned about putting an actual named slot in any of our chairs. The reason being, sometimes it's more difficult to recruit for vacancies in those positions, and based on an experience that we just had with a ruling from the city attorney on the Creeks Commission or committee, even if a seat is vacant, evidently that still counts as a seat when you're talking about quorum. So if we had 7 members and a seat was vacant, that's one basically absence from each meeting. So if you combine that it's harder to fill the seat, then you always have one absence.
Could I ask a question? Just for a matter of order, if we didn't add the extra member, had the youth on as a voting member, then we wouldn't have an odd number. And when it came to voting, rule of order, we would be off. That's why you suggested the 7, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Am I right?
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, okay.
Well, if I may, there is no rule or law that says you have to have an odd number. Any motion that results in a tie vote fails. That's all.
Right.
So a 3-3 vote would be a no vote.
And that's not effective.
I think, unfortunately, our timing is pretty limited here. And although I know there has been discussion about this, if the commission was going to make a recommendation, I would recommend that they perhaps do it in a way which directs staff to support it if, in fact, it can. Our issue is the timeline, and that something like this will need probably more council discussion, and what effect might that have on other boards and commissions. And so I would like to just, if you could frame your recommendation such that you would support it and you would, direct staff to take it forward, if the timing allows. We're happy to take that. We support the youth voice, but I just would want to be careful that we're able to make it happen in the right way.
Raka, go on. Yeah.
I'm going to take a stab at a recommendation. I think this is the kind of thing that would be great to have consensus on. So if I'll run it up the flagpole, nobody salutes it. So the first part of the recommendation is that we do reconfirm the recommendation to amend the city charter to formally consolidate the boards. And the second would be that we would recommend an increase of the membership of the Consolidated Commission from 5 to 7 only if one of the additional 2 is a designated seat for a qualified elector of the city between the ages of 18 and 25. So just to back off, that would be the recommendation, and so that way it would be either stay at 5 or move up to 7 if we're adding a voting youth seat.
And that would be in lieu of the intern?
I think the motion can be silent on that. I think that would remain to be seen. The process for selecting the intern. Here's my reasoning behind being silent on it. The process for selecting the intern and the way that this commission interacts with the youth commission, the youth council, is like one process, and it's a good process. And I think there's a whole nother. We're taking a whole nother step to say that that we're going to designate a youth voice as a voting member of the commission. That person who becomes a commissioner may or may not come up through the youth council, may or may not have a relationship to the youth council, and having a youth commissioner may cause us to want to rethink our whole process for getting youth input. So I would just take it as a separate issue.
I'm gonna stop right now. I want to set a second before we have any more discussion, because I have a couple points, but I want a second on it before. Are we going to get a?
I'll second it.
Okay.
But
So
I
now-
have something to say as
Okay,
well.
move to discussion. Yes.
What I'd like to say is, if we use 18 years of age, then we're going to be cutting out the kids in high school who have...
They can't serve. It's in
So
the-
they cannot serve.
No, that's in the city. You have to be
That
a
means that our
qualified
youth intern would not be that person, because our youth intern... Yeah, okay. All right. Just wanted clarification on that. Thank you.
That's a separate issue. And I have a little trouble with this designation exactly, and that is because the largest growing segment of our population is the senior segment, and we're not including a seat for that group which we serve. So I'm not sure I want to completely designate a seat. If we do that, then it's important to me that we have a horticulturist on, and I think then that just snowballs in. I think we have to look at what we want size-wise, and then we have to recruit it, not specify it, because we've gone through times when we couldn't get anybody in those seats. We come up with the problem that Mr. Hockman was discussing. So I think we either want to go 5 to 7 or we don't. And then who comes on it, we have to work with staff at that particular time to make sure it happens. So that's my thought.
Could I, just as a suggestion, it seems that we're all in favor, I believe, of reconfirming number A. Why don't we take that separately, get that approved?
Well, we have a motion on the floor. We have to vote on that one, and then we can separate them out or do whatever, depending
Can
on
we
our
have I believe we can have up to 3 motions on the floor. Can we have a second motion?
My understanding of parliamentary procedure is that you can only have one. The remainder motions that can be on the floor have to be related to the motion that's already there.
They can't be in conflict with. Okay. So, any more discussion on the motion we have on the floor right now?
Yeah, our Street Trees Committee has a 3-member board with 2 alternates. I don't know if we've given it any thought of having a 5-member board with 1 alternate. I don't know how that would play out, but just to throw that out as something else we want to be looking at if we're going to be changing.
I don't know. I've never heard of a appointed commission having that.
I don't know either. Carla, do you? I don't recall ever hearing of.
I've never seen an appointment
alternate.
to like planning commission to have an alternate or anything.
Right.
The seat vacates and then they wait till, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I certainly respect where Chair Longstreet is coming from. I would certainly be open to also talking about, a designated seat for the senior community. That I'm not opposed to that by any means. I do think that to say that there can be a snowball effect and we can over-designate is a reason not to designate at all. I'm not convinced by that. And I think that there is a systematic underrepresentation in city policy and city planning of younger Santa Barbarans. And I think that especially for our commission and for our commission's purview, so much of what we do is targeted at young people. And we have adults, although I don't like making that distinction because we're talking about adults, but we have older adults making decisions and thinking about what's good for younger adults or children. And the best way to square that circle is to just include them into the planning process from the beginning and in a substantive way. So I think that, yes, we could over program the commission in lots of different directions. And I agree with Chair Longstreet that the overall political challenge is recruitment and actively recruiting the right people. But I think that the crucial shot across the bow for the rest of the city is to say that we are very, very much committed to including the people that we claim to represent in the decision-making process.
Mr. Hockman.
Thank you, Chair Longstreet. As it stands now, I think I would be voting no on the current motion, largely because it would take us to 7 plus the intern, and now we're got a large group of people at the table. And for some of the reasons that I expressed before, it's possible that I might be interested in a different motion that bumped us to 7, with one of those slots being the person from who our current intern is, and he's the chair of the Youth Advisory Committee, or no?
Just an appointee.
An appointee from the Youth Advisory Committee, which could then change from time to time. I'm not saying I think that would be another discussion to have, but I'm not interested in going to 7 plus 1 myself.
And I guess, okay, well, I would again say, even though we consolidate our advisory committees, I'll give a perfect example. West Beach Art ended up with probably an extra 15 to 20 hours of meetings that we really didn't have anybody that could free up to go to. I went, but we get those every so often, and there are a couple times a year where it's like now, and if we're not represented, it's a problem. So I think though we should call for the question on this particular motion, which is to reconfirm the consolidation of the Park and Recreation Commission and to increase the membership to 7 members, contingent on 1 being a designated youth under 25 qualified elector of the city. Is that the good? That's the one? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Mayor.
No. Okay, so now we're looking at an alternate motion. I think you had a recommendation.
Well, I move that we reconfirm 9A, that the commission amends the city charter.
Okay.
Second.
Is there discussion on that item? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we dealt with one of them. It may be that the commission at this time does not feel that it should move to 7. I will float the motion that we increase the Parks and Recreation Commission to 7, and we'll see if it gets a second or a vote.
I'm going to second that.
Okay, is there discussion?
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Rapp, what would the timing be of if we made this recommendation, then it goes to council, and then when does it go to it has to go to the voters to amend the charter, or tell me how it goes.
The city clerk, I've been asked to take your recommendations to the city clerk within the week, and then that office will begin working on a council agenda report with recommendations for council, and I don't know when the final language but would have to be submitted for the ballot, but I do know it's a very short time frame, and as much as I really would like to see this move forward, I'm just concerned whether there's sufficient time to vet how it will all work out, but I'm happy to explore that.
Which ballot?
The November ballot.
And then, from what I read in the report, I believe then it would not be until the mid-year recruitment the following June that they would.
No, if it's approved in November, then it's approved in the city charter, and then it would take place in December.
I thought
Well, it says the next semi-annual. And that
Oh,
after November.
semi-annual, I was thinking, okay, never mind.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
So, the one other thing that I would maybe add to your discussion before you make a decision that occurs to me is that a young person, 18 to 25, might be hesitant to take on a 4-year commitment. I certainly know that many of the adults, when I was recruiting commissioners for this term, had reservations about a 4-year commitment. And so, I mean, there are probably options with that if you were to structure it that it's a 2-year commitment for that seat only. But I just wanted to point that out to you, that that was a challenge anyway. And I think, for a young person, their life is in such a state of transition. I could understand people being hesitant to make a 4-year commitment. So,
Well, we have a motion on the floor, and I'll call. Yeah?
Just one last comment. I just think that we'd be setting an example that while at one hand the city is trying to grapple with a lack of income for this next year, that people might think, and I don't think if they really understood the situation would think this, but might think we might be considered a little frivolous, worrying about whether 5 people or 7 people when we're trying to solve a lot larger issue. I will be voting against it.
Yes.
I will also be voting against it because I don't see the pressing need to move to seven members in the abstract. And not to beat a dead horse, but people between the ages of 18 and 25 are in fact many of them engaged in deciding exactly what kind of 4-year commitment they're going to be making. And I think they are capable of making that commitment. I think that I think it's great that we have an intern. I think that's a very different thing than having a voting commissioner. And it's also a different constituency. By definition, a voting commissioner has to be an elector. And I think it's very good to have the input of people who are not yet eligible to vote. So I think they're separate things. I'm going to vote no on this because, to me, the carrot for moving from 5 to 7 is bringing on a voting member who's young. So,
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
No.
So we have a decision. Off you go.
what was the final count? Sorry.
It was 3-2.
Okay.
2 in favor, Ada and myself, and 3 against.
Okay, so the recommendations that we will take forward are to consolidate the 2 commissions into one and to leave the number at the current number. I would, however, like to just add to the conversation about the representation of the youth voice. We will take this discussion that the commission had to the Council Committee on Youth and Children, because that is a discussion for them. And it may be that we just, this time frame, it wasn't the right time to make that happen. But I think, they view the commission as being, the pathfinder for this particular issue. And I think if the commission has a general support for exploring that further, we'll be happy to take that to that committee, which is kind of looking at how to build a better youth voice into the city government.
And yeah, I think the unfortunate part is that we can't make a change down the road because now we're going to be 5, and it has to go to the charter to go to 7. And that's where our hands are tied in this particular thing. So it's hard to be a charter commission in that decisions can't be made at council. So, but it'll be another election, and it has to wait until it goes back on the, when they do charter amendments again on a council.
I was only hoping it would happen within my purview, but however, if that's the choice of the commission, there it is.
Just as a comment, maybe in the future they could look at making it this so this is not a charter committee, but rather a non-charter organization where city council can make the changes without going through the steps. And I don't know enough of the process if that even makes sense.
I think that has to go to a vote of the people also.
Yeah, you'd have to remove.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
And the other comment that I would just like to make sure that it gets to City Council during this discussion is that there didn't seem to be huge opposition to moving to 7. It's just that wanting to find a real substantive reason to do it and possibly using that move, as other commissioners said, with a reason and an opportunity to get better representation. I think that's what's really important.
Yeah, I just want to concur with that and say that, if the chair of the commission happens to be speaking with members of the city council or if there's discussions between staff and the city council and the full range of this discussion is brought up, that I personally, though I voted against the motion, I would not be bent out of shape if the council did put an increase to 7 on the ballot, because as it's been pointed out, that would perhaps open up other possibilities later.
Okay. Well, I think we have beat that horse pretty well. And it brings us to item 10, which is the follow-up to our budget work session.
Chair Longstreet, I hate to end a meeting with doom and gloom, but I'll start out with the nice thing first.
Smile when you say it.
I did put together for you, and I gave each of you, it's really intended to be kind of a resource sheet as we move through the budget process. I took the salient points of the commission comments and recommendations. In some cases it was a recommendation, or it was that we really ought to look further into this, and I grouped them into revenue ideas, cost shift ideas, co-sponsorships and partnerships, public outreach and advocacy, and then we had some general ones. And I just wanted to, because it's going to be hard for us to make sure that we're staying on top of all the discussion points, so I didn't want anything to get lost in 10 pages of minutes. That's one thing. The second thing is, unfortunately, the city has just revised its numbers for the revenue deficit for both FY9 and FY10. And we will be asked to make additional reductions in the last 3 months of this year, and that will be a challenge for us because the desire is to not make losing positions as part of that, and so we're kind of struggling with that. I will just tell you that at least our quick look at revenue doesn't show that we're going to be off too much more than what we thought. So we're seeing a lot of good activity for registration for activities for summer programs. So we're continuing to watch that on a weekly basis. The bad news is that the revenue projection is off by almost $2 million for, I'm sorry, an additional $1 million for FY10. And so what that means for the Parks and Recreation Department is that our previous budget we were asked to submit with was to be reduced $1.265 million, which was 8.4% reduction. We've been asked to increase that by $220,000 for a reduction of 9.9, bringing our total to nearly 1.5 million. And we have been asked to submit an additional $382,000 in reductions that could be taken if needed. And that would bring our total reduction to just under $2 million if in fact all of those reductions took place. And hopefully that this projection of revenue is good, but I will just tell you it's a little disturbing for me that our last revenue projection that we did was in January, and this is only March. And
I am so sorry. But I think that means that we need to go to work.
And in what we had talked about at our work session and looking at the partnerships, looking at getting the word out to the people that we deal with on a daily basis, and some of those we don't deal with on a daily basis, but you know, like we talked about, it's not going to necessarily be well, there is going to be, we're going to need to advocate for keeping some of this, because really I find a lot of the misconceptions and things that are in the paper, which are usually misconceptions, damage us. I mean, I'll go to the most recent one when we looked at city employees, and they said, and Lanny Ebenstein said, and they get 26 Fridays a year off. Well, they work 80 hours in 9 days. And it's those kind of misconceptions that I think make people think there's this fat happening. You know, our workers go out and work 80 hours in their 2 weeks. And our grounds workers are not retiring at 50 years of age. They're working 40 years. We see that all you have to do is watch when the city administrator hands out the pins, how many of those 30 and 40-year employees are in parks, are in wastewater treatment, the majority of the working folks. So I think there's some misconceptions out there that need to be cleared up, that they're overpaid. And, you know, I think it's up to us to do that advocating. And we have the lists of, we've talked about places we're going. I know I spoke with Santa Barbara, Terry from Santa Barbara Beautiful, and there are organizations that want to know what Parks needs, and you know, they're not an endless resource, but they want to step up and help. And so we need to find out more of those people that care. I think in horticulture especially, there's you know, that people understand that if those resources are lost, we're not getting them back. Plants that are gone. And, you know, it's the same for our children, too. I think if they're gone for the summer, that they may be lost to us, too. And so we have to advocate on all levels.
I had 2 questions for the Commission. Whether there were any additional, I mean, even just kind of reading over the notes from the work session, whether there were any additional reports that you would like from staff so that we're, you know, presenting those to you in April when you're also hearing the budget. And I also know that Commissioner Burns has, by his questions, expressed an interest in looking to see how we are using our facilities and what opportunities we might have for additional revenue. And I would like to suggest that, you know, that that staff work with Commissioner Burns and anyone else on the Commission that would have that interest to really sit down and talk through different ideas and, you know, perhaps give him a greater background in our city facilities and how we use them to see if, in fact, there are some things that the Commission would like to have us pursue. And there may be other things that were discussed as part of this list that some of you would like to, pursue in that way. As staff, we are scrambling to put the best budget together, but sometimes it takes somebody with that outside picture to come in and ask the question and why not, and move that forward. So that was one suggestion that I had, and I believe Commissioner Burns would be interested in doing that.
I would be interested. I hope you appreciate the fact that I will probably ask some dumb questions, but I hopefully you'll get some good input out from me. Thank you.
And I would just like to say, after the budget meeting, there weren't any dumb questions asked at that budget meeting. And all of those questions, especially from the new commissioners, helped me to look at things in a different light. So I don't think there are dumb questions out there. And I think we all need to look at things, as we've said, everywhere you go these days, there's a paradigm shift. So.
Just off the bat, I can see one thing that might be added next to, is there potential for P&R facilities to be operated by a third party? If we could add the bathhouse downstairs onto that, because we've talked about that over the years.
And actually, I'll give you a very brief update. There is a group of city staff that has been, for the last few months, developing a report that they will be presenting through the city's Leadership Academy, which is our staff training and development program. And they anticipate that their report will be complete in the fall. And I just met with them this week, and they'll be presenting their report to executive management, and then I asked them following that if they would come and present that report to the Commission, because I think it will take that discussion of the public-private partnerships and the complexity that we have with the fact that that's a historic building. I think there are a lot of, there's a lot of good information there for us to move forward. So I do have that planned for the fall. Thank you for mentioning that.
And I would just, at this point, it is so hard to wait for this budget. Knowing what's going on, but we don't have any of the details. Boy, it's tough. And I mean, not that I want to see it, but it's almost like looking at the car wreck. You feel like you're just waiting, anticipation. So, any other comments, Mr. Hockman? Did you have any?
Unless there's objection, I was going to move to adjourn.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
I would just like to say thank you, everyone.